Virelian Secundus Hive Tharsis Echelon. The descent into hive Tharsis Echelon was more ritual than arrival. The shuttle knifed through the copper-hazed smog, its engines howling like condemned souls. Appropriate, Kaede thought, given what would follow. Below, the hive-city sprawled like a rusted carcass gnawed upon by poverty and heresy in equal measure. She stood in the cabin, unmoving, as her retinue readied themselves for what they foolishly believed would be action. Interrogator Calrus adjusted his data slate. Sister Militant and Vera checked her bolt pistol thrice, all so eager. Kaede didn't speak. She simply raised her fan, gold-veined, lacquered, deadly, and they knew better than to follow as the hatch opened. The hive air struck her like a wet sigh, pollution and desperation masked poorly by incense. She descended alone, each step a theatre of disdainful grace. Her uchikake unfurled behind her, red as execution, trailing over ground no other dared sully with silk. Her eyes settled on a modest tea-house tucked between auto mechanics and shrine vendors. The last petal. How quaint. Inside, the light was soft, filtered through paper screens. Locals hunched over chipped cups, speaking in hushed tones that turned to silence as she entered. Kaede's presence was not one that requested attention. It commanded it. She selected a table at the center, naturally. Her garb pooled around her like the remnants of a divine murder. She didn't sit. She descended into the chair as if it were a throne, back straight, fingers curled loosely around the war fan. The server girl approached, quivering. "Bring me tea?" Something ancient, something that tastes like regret. The girl fled. Kaede let her gaze drift across the room, flickering candles, trembling patrons, the old man in the corner pretending not to stare. "This place will be ash by next week," she said aloud, voice rich and honeyed with contempt. "And still, I rather like the drapes. Pity." She looked toward a cracked mirror on the far wall. Her own reflection stared back, poised and monstrous. "They'll say it was justice," she added, mostly to herself. "But really, it's just paperwork. I have a quota, and they," she gestured faintly at the patrons, "have sins. Convenient." She smiled then, a slow curling thing. "Let them steep my tea in fear. It improves the flavour." People, of course, catch her flair for the melodramatic. Are inquisitors like this? Normally, no. However, to one that is jaded and notoriously unstable, yeah. She has been responsible for possibly billions of lives, and yes, some bother her. Most? No, not really. For her, it is about prestige, and yes, following the imperial creed. But in the end, for a girl who was abused and mistreated by her own father in very negative ways, and then thrown into the Schola Progenium, her empathy was kinda her undoing. It broke her, and now that gift ain't a gift. It has driven her nearly insane. The idea of death is a strangely beautiful thing to her, as well as the art of fire. However, as she sits, the people overall ignore her, except for a couple that notice her attire. They hoof it out of there fast. A thin boy, 18, and with deep eyes of hardened sadness but understanding looks to her. He tilts his head and says softly, "Regret, that's a bitter flavour." He smiles gently, sipping his own tea. Her fingers stilled. The soft clack of porcelain on wood had almost masked his voice, but not quite. She turned slowly, deliberately, like a clockwork goddess deciding whether the hour should strike. The boy had not fled. In fact, he had looked her in the eyes. Kaede's fan snapped open with a rustling crackle like silk tearing under a blade. She fanned herself once, languid, bored, masking. Her expression remained neutral, but only just. Beneath the surface, 1,000 fractures spiderwebbed, regret, bitter. She had interrogated generals, broken preachers on truth altars, flayed the secrets from psychers' skulls. They all spoke like that in the end, whispers of sorrow and pain, each one a hymn to their own damnation. But this boy, this urchin, spoke it like a shared language, calm, unafraid, and worse, understanding. The nerve. She tilted her head ever so slightly, a gesture both regal and mocking. "And what," she purred, "would you know of regret, little tea-rat?" Her smirk was curved and cruel, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Tell me quickly," she added, voice like velvet razors, "before I decide your honesty offends me." The boy actually laughs and shrugs ridiculously slim shoulders. His laugh isn't mocking, it is something bittersweet. He responds casually, "I am indeed a rat that likes tea. This place here, it is one of the few spots that serves it well. As for regret, it's part of life, but also is what makes one strong. A person who chooses not to have regret is one of two things: A noble or a fool. You definitely have some of the former, but you're not the latter. He, of course, recognizes that she is an official, but the boy ain't one to know who an Inquisitor is, not truly. He simply is a product of this world. The fan snapped shut with a crack like a judge's gavel. Kaede stared at him. There were no words at first, no venom, no lecture, no condemnation. Just silence and stillness, which for her was far more dangerous. Her eyes narrowed, not in fury, but in curiosity, a blade reconsidering its target. She raised the fan to her chin, tapping it lightly. Her black-gloved fingers drummed once, twice. Then she spoke, voice low, almost thoughtful. "You realize," she said slowly, like each word was a shard of glass she chose not to throw, "that what you just said is the single worst thing in the entire galaxy." She tilted her head the other way now, bird-like, studying. And also, perhaps, the best. Her lips curled, not quite into a smile, more a wicked crescent of interest. Her tone turned playfully sharp, testing. "You called me a noble without knowing my name, and you called me not a fool after hearing me speak aloud. Either you're desperately naive, or dangerously perceptive." The fan touched her cheek now, a false blush of contemplation. "So which are you, T-Rat? A child who thinks regret is strength, or something stranger and far more entertaining?" The boy sighs gently and responds lightly. "Like I said, you're obviously an official. You dress as you do from a desire to hold on to who you were and are now. As for myself, I am simply a man. A child compared to you, I am sure, but maybe I simply want to live life while I can with what I have. One isn't guaranteed tomorrow, or even now. Sure, I have regrets, countless regrets, but it isn't strength they've given me. It simply has given me clarity." He winked slightly. Kaede blinked, once. Then came the smirk, slow and serpentine. It crept across her lips like a secret finally admitted to herself. She leaned back in her seat, head counting ever so slightly, and a soft, unexpected laugh slipped from her throat. Quiet and melodic, the kind of sound no one in the room had ever heard from someone dressed for judgment. It wasn't cruel. It was entertained. "Clarity," she repeated as if tasting the word. "What an adorable thing to aspire to in a place like this." She tapped the fan lightly against her chin once more, then lowered it, resting her elbow on the arm of her chair. Her gaze never left his, warp dark eyes glittering. "Very well, T-Rat, you've bought this wretched little den another sunrise. I'll let it breathe, for now." Her smile deepened, aristocratic and amused. "But I find myself curious, and I despise curiosity when it isn't swiftly resolved." She leaned forward slightly, imposing, regal, intrigued. "Your name? Give it to me, now." He tells her pointedly, "My name is Arturian Thraune at your service, or well, hopefully no longer just T-Rat." His gaze has sadness, but also some amusement. Is he afraid? Yes, profoundly, but he doesn't hide it. He also doesn't run off, because he figures, how long does he have? 2 years, tops. He would rather live life without regret, and also simply meet the Emperor without anything wasted. Tilting his head, he perks a brow. "As for curiosity, I would ask your name, but I am not sure I am biting off more than I should." Kaede let his name hang in the air like incense smoke. Arturian Thraune. It curled around her thoughts, unfamiliar yet oddly shaped to fit within them. Her fan opened with a soft rustle of silk and lacquer, and she leaned back, crossing one leg over the other with calculated grace. "Arturian," she repeated, tasting it like fine wine. "A poetic name, almost tragic." She fanned herself once, slow and deliberate. "I am Inquisitor Kaede Shirohana, Ordo Hereticus, chosen instrument of the God Emperor's wrath, purifier of sin, judge of the soul." She let the words fall one by one, each heavy with grandeur. Her gaze never left him, watching, waiting, for the fear to spike, for the realization to dawn, for the trembling to begin. But instead, nothing. His brow furrowed, his eyes searched hers with that same sadness, that same weary courage, confusion. She blinked. He doesn't know. For a long heartbeat, she stared at him, truly stared, and then her laughter broke like glass chimes in a storm. Not cruel, not mocking, not even hollow. Genuine. The few remaining patrons flinched at the sound, but Kaede didn't care. She laughed like someone who hadn't in far too long. Oh, that's delightful," she said, pressing the back of her hand to her cheek as the fan lowered. "Tell me, Arturian Thraune, are you always this precious? Or is this hive simply blessed to have such a delightful fool among its rubble?" She grinned at him, eyes bright with dangerous curiosity. "You're either too innocent to understand what I am, or brave enough not to care, and I cannot decide which is more useful. This actually makes the boy laugh. He almost falls out of his chair. Grinning, he says softly, "Special? No, I am far from that. Maybe I'm brave to the point of being a fool? No, simply one with a desire to live life while he can. I have heard of the sororitas, and my father, when I talked with him, talked a little of the Inquisition. I just don't know much about the Ordos. Regardless, I think it matters little in the end. I see a person who will do much. I unfortunately must depart, but maybe we will talk again." He stands, nods respectfully, and leaves, coughing lightly before walking out the door. Had she sought him outside, it's a waste of time. He has vanished into the darkness. Kaede watched him laugh, truly laugh, and for the first time in recent memory she felt something other than contempt or wariness settle in her chest. It wasn't comfort. That would be too generous. But it was a stir, a flicker. He was coughing. She noted it deliberately. And then he stood, bowed like a peasant to a queen, and walked away. No plea for mercy, no grovelling, no attempt to impress or escape. Just a boy, no, a man, perhaps, disappearing into the dark like a candle snuffed by the wind. She did not stand. She knew better than to chase ghosts. Still, her eyes lingered on the door far longer than she cared to admit. There was a tightness in her throat. Not grief, not pain. More like a memory she didn't remember choosing. "One sickly boy," she murmured aloud, "saves a hive that deserved the pyre. Hilarious." She laughed once, dry and slow, then rose like dawn over a battlefield, graceful, regal, and veiled in fresh intrigue. Outside, the ash wind had not changed. Interrogator Kalrus stepped forward from his vigil beside the transport, his hood drawn up, face pale and wary. Kaede didn't look at him immediately. She looked at the hive skyline, then the sky, then finally at him. "Arturian Thraune," she said, approximately 5'2", thin, sickly, deep eyes, sad and clear, possibly dying. Kalrus blinked, nodding slowly. "An associate inquisitor?" Her eyes sharpened like a drawn blade. "A curiosity, and one I wish to understand before the galaxy eats him like it does all interesting things." She stepped past him, her voice cold now. "Business. Check all Imperial archives. Birth records, census data, medical logs, every administrative scrap this wretched hive has ever filed. I want to know who he is, what ails him, and who he belongs to." Her eyes met his, and her fan tapped once, sharply against her palm. "Do not fail me, Kalrus. Not on this." Then, almost too soft to hear, she added, and she laughed, and she walked on. Kalrus is a man who is and has been a lover of Kaede's more than once. Her carnal appetites are something of a legend, even if it is never spoken. He feels a bit of jealousy, deep simmering jealousy. He has been her chief interrogator, and he thought he had been her confidant. However, it is moments like this that makes the man realize he will never be much beyond a bedside favor. Me personally, I am the kind of guy to take a hint and move around, or even enjoy the benefits. Not so with Kalrus. He simply nods and says softly, "I will do as you say. I am curious." He walks up to catch up with her and continues, "What is so important about this one? You say associate. I know what that means. It means curiosity." Kaede's pace did not falter, but the air around her shifted like the moment before a storm breaks. Her fan remained at her side, now closed, now heavy in her grip like a judgment not yet delivered. Kalrus's voice was low, measured, but she could hear the strain in it. An old ache, the kind that had never been soothed properly. He had been in her bed, in her confidence, in her shadow, and still he forgot his place. She stopped. The crimson veil of her uchikake settled behind her like drawn curtains at the end of an opera. Slowly she turned her head, just enough for her gaze to find him, sharpened glass under velvet. Her voice, when it came, was soft, deadly soft. "Do not," she said, "ask about the boy again." Each word landed like a drop of poison into wine, calm, precise, irrevocable. "He is not your concern. He's not your business. He is mine." She stepped closer, just enough that her voice didn't have to rise at all, yet still felt like it echoed through him. "You are here to serve, to obey, to bleed when I command it, and to vanish when I no longer require your presence. That is the arrangement." The fan lifted, tapped lightly once against his chest. "I let you pretend otherwise. Once that indulgence has ended." Her eyes lingered a moment longer, and then she turned without another word, walking toward the waiting transport. Her stride spoke louder than her voice ever had. There is only one flame I choose to warm my hands by now. The man that is Kalrus is so hurt that he damn near steps on the train of her Uchikake, but swiftly stops before he does. He had seen her slit the throat of a man who had done that just by accident. Silently, he simply nods and takes off into the shadows to do as he is told. The spire of St. Norelius, repurposed shrine fortress, overlooks Hive Tharsis Echelon like an ancient deity watching over its subjects. The woman is able to relax and also meditate some, as well as simply enjoy the view in the mirror. That is herself. Yes, she is vain and borderline narcissistic, but in the end, such things are welcome distractions from the regret in her unstable conscience. A young woman approaches. Her name is Miyumi. This is a girl who is also from Tsukikage. She is a failed sororitas. It ain't because of her faith or lack thereof either. It is simply that she was too frail to make the cut, so instead of sending her to an unpleasant fate, the canoness who liked the girl made sure she wound up with Kaede and her very unmerry band of lethal individuals. She sits across from the woman she considers a mother figure and hands her the reports that Kalrus had rounded up for her. I hope this is what you're seeking, Nisan. The spire's sanctum chamber was washed in a crimson glow, the filtered light of Varelian's sun bleeding through stained glass saints, all bathed in fire and flagellation. Kaede sat reclined upon a silken couch lined with void damask and stitched purity seals. Before her stood a mirror of black-polished obsidian, where she watched herself with the same cold fascination she once gave to tortured heretics. Vanity was not indulgence, it was armor, it was a religion. When Miyumi entered, Kaede didn't move. The girl's presence was soft, like morning incense drifting from temple steps. Her meek footsteps were always careful not to echo, yet Kaede noticed, always. She turned only slightly, offering a side glance softened by familiarity. Miyumi bowed respectfully, then placed a sealed data scroll upon the table between them. I hope this is what you're seeking, Nisan. Kaede's lips curved. The name still stirred something warm in the hollow behind her ribs. Relax, child. If you tremble any harder, the saints might think you're praying. Her voice, though rich with amusement, held no bite. She took the scroll with long fingers, slicing the seal open with a flick of her fan's edge. She read silently. Her eyes scanned, sharpened, narrowed. Isaac Thraune, former guardsman, survived his campaign, disgraceful. Most of them had the decency to die, an alcoholic, never home. Typical. Eleanor Thraune, accused not prosecuted for abuse. Local clergy filed a report, ignored. Arturian was 14. Kaede's hand tensed around the scroll. Sarah's, a minor hive town named after some long-dead saint. How quaint. 4 years. 4 years this boy had lived like prey. No support, no power, no protection. Yet he looked her in the eyes and spoke of regret like a philosopher cloaked in poverty. Kaede laughed, not loud but deep in her chest. She laughed at the absurdity of it, the comedy of the cosmos. This one boy, this tea-rat, this wounded little creature had spared Hive Tharsis Echelon from annihilation. Fascinating, she murmured, resting her chin on her hand. Utterly fascinating. She looked to Miyumi, her expression unreadable. A guardsman's failure, a mother's shame, a forgotten slum child born under the shadow of saints, and somehow he has done what petitions, bribes, and prayers could not. She exhaled through her nose, amused, bitter, pleased. The fire sleeps. For now, because of him. Kaede set the scroll aside and stared again into the mirror, not at herself, but at something deeper. Find me a portraitist, Miyumi, she said after a beat. I want his likeness sketched, before memory turns his eyes soft again. The portraitist hired is a master of his craft, and he also has seen the boy more than once throughout the city. He sketches what the Inquisitor requires and then some. In fact, he catches Arturian's gaunt and almost homely features perfectly. Those eyes, those large green eyes, are a perfect window and perfect representation of what he possesses. The warmth within them, as well as the warmth he gives off, is expertly portrayed. The man is paid very well to paint the face for a portrait to hang on her wall. The other is to keep his mouth shut. The boy sees the Inquisitor sitting where she usually tends to, as of late near the back of the tea house. Her uchikake flows all over the floor, but has no signs of dirt or anything close. They have been talking now for a few weeks. He sits now across from her and smiles gently. Good to see you. He coughs gently, a dry cough. By now, she would know that Arturian is suffering from a genetically inherited disease. It skips generations, but the men or women who catch it usually don't like to see this boy's age. Even now, that warmth he generates cannot be contained. He hands her a sketch. "You wanted to see if I could draw. I don't have much of a gift, but here you go." The image is perfect, almost as good as the portraitists, but even better at catching the eyes. He has captured her soul perfectly. It shows her sitting imperiously, fan open, her uchikake pulled about herself, hiding the armor she tends to wear, even catches the unhinged look in her almond eyes. Kaede took the sketch from his hands with the careless grace of one expecting something crude, something childlike, perhaps charming, perhaps pitiful. She had asked out of curiosity, not expectation. She was, after all, the one who judged, not the one who received. Then her eyes fell upon the page. She didn't breathe. The lines were spare, yet alive. Her form elegant and proud. Her fan half raised like a mask of rank and ritual. The uchikake flowed like silk and flame, pooling around her like the remains of ceremony or slaughter. And then the eyes. Not just sharp, not just mad. Seen. He had seen her. Kaede's fingers trembled as if the sketch burned. She almost dropped it, almost let it flutter like a condemned soul across the lacquered table. Her gaze snapped to the bottom where, penned in delicate high Gothic runes, was a single word: regret. The fan she always wielded remained still, useless. For the first time in decades, Kaede Shirohana felt exposed, not disarmed, not betrayed, just seen. She looked up. No mask, no smile, no barbed word or poised irony. Just Kaede, Hisako, 1,000 fractured pieces trying to hold their shape. And this boy was smiling, soft, warm, as if she were a sunrise, not a storm, as if he were comforting her. She spoke, and her voice was quiet, controlled, brittle as antique glass. "You accept me, this, all of it." Not a question, a statement laced with awe and fear, a truth she had never allowed herself to believe. Her eyes, black and glimmering like a deep pool of warp glass, did not look away. No man ever has. Not once. She held the sketch now like a reliquary. "And yet, you did." He shrugs slim shoulders before tensing somewhat. He spasms lightly, definitely intimidated by the look in her eyes. Arturian, of course, isn't stupid. He knows she is more than she appears. But he also knows that he has stepped into territory no other man has. Not truly. The boy leans back lightly and smiles sadly. "I am glad you like it. Of course I accept you. You're a fine person. You've messed with my head more than once, and definitely kept me on my toes. That is a good thing. You're simply put, as I just said, a fine human being." He sounds naive, maybe even stupid. Calros would be laughing right now, but that is because he doesn't see Kaede. The boy does. He sees a woman who deserves respect and to be seen. Kaede's scowl came unbidden, sharp and immediate, as if the boy's kindness had struck her like a lash instead of a balm. She turned her head slightly, sleeve rising in a graceful arc to shield her face. The gesture was not of the Inquisitor. It was of Hisako, a girl long thought buried beneath rank and blood and fire. Her breath hitched just barely. No one in her retinue would ever see it. No courtier, no subordinate, no man she'd taken to her bed, only he had seen it. This boy, with death in his lungs and sunlight in his eyes. "You," she began, but the word fractured in her throat. Her hand clenched around the edge of the sleeve. When she looked at him again, her expression was twisted, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Emotion in its rawest, most defiant form. "Where?" she hissed softly, voice tremoring like glass under pressure. "In the Emperor's name, could such a light as you exist in this rot pit of a galaxy?" She stared at him with haunted reverence, black eyes wild, unhinged not from anger, but from the cruelty of timing, from the simple, unbearable fact that he existed and had come too late. "You're not supposed to exist," she said, voice rising with quiet fury, with mourning. "Not now, not here. I've burned worlds, Arturian. I've salted the bones of faithless planets and laughed while their screams echoed into the void. And then you." Her words faltered again. Her lip trembled before her teeth clenched it into silence. "You should have come to me before I became this," she said, voice barely audible, trembling. "Before Kaede drowned Hisako." Her fan clattered from her hand, forgotten. He, of course, being the well-meaning idiot, catches the fan and gently places it on the table. That seals his fate more than anything else. Yeah, once a man had tried to snatch the fan from her not too long ago. She had flicked it open and slashed his throat with the hidden monofilament blades within its edges. Yeah, a gory spectacle that actually had made her laugh. This is different. He hands her the thing gently, and that seals his fate further. The fan, a sacred symbol of her poise, her command, her power, clattered like a fallen crown upon the lacquered table. And he, this thin, coffin, all too fragile boy, caught it, not greedily, not stupidly. He caught it, held it with reverence, laid it before her like a penitent returning a relic to its rightful altar. That act sealed something deeper than fate. Kaede moved. It was not a graceful drift nor a slow pivot of ceremony. She stood in a single motion, fluid, forceful, violent in its restraint. Her hand lashed out, catching his wrist with iron force. Her grip was ice and fire, and entirely inexorable. Enough, she breathed. He looked up, surprised, but he did not fight. Of course he didn't. He trusted her. Kaede's teeth clenched as that thought, that unbearable thought, tore through her like a heretical prayer. She dragged out of the tea house like a storm pulling at a leaf. No one dared stop her. No one dared look. The shadows of the alley swallowed them whole. And there, where no eyes could profane the moment, where no voice would echo, she turned, and she embraced him. Her arms wrapped around him like chains, silken and suffocating. She crushed him against her breastplate, burying his face in the folds of her uchikake. Her breathing was ragged, not with exertion, but with everything else. Rage, sorrow, longing, hope, that most cruel and forbidden of sins. "You should not exist," she whispered into his hair, her voice broken, her control unravelling. "You were never meant to find me." She pulled him tighter. "I don't know what you are, Arturian Thraune. A miracle? A mistake? A test?" She trembled now. Not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of not knowing what to do with him. "But you're mine now." And even if he didn't understand it fully in that moment, something in the air shifted, like the galaxy itself had stopped to hold its breath. Before Terra was formed, there was of course the island chain of Japan. The Edo period was the time. Hisako's ancestor, a Taiyu named Hisako, the one Kaede was named after, ironically. This girl had dared to love a mute boy, a gaijin. She had died 2 years after the boy died, fulfilling a promise. The story was passed down to each generation in different forms. Kaede ain't a dummy, she knows the irony here. Arturian spasms, his heart hammering as he whispers into her ear, "Maybe the Emperor has a sense of humour?" Had anyone said that before this moment, they would have been executed by her hand, but in the end he might just be right. Kaede froze. Not from fear, from the truth of his words. Anyone else, anyone would have died in that moment. To suggest the Emperor of mankind, a divine architect of the Imperium, had a sense of humour? That was heresy spoken with a smile. But in his mouth, in his voice, it felt like a blessing. Like some strange echo of fate's own riddle finally spoken aloud. Her lips parted in a rare, genuine sound, a laugh. Soft, disbelieving, shaken from the marrow of a woman who had not truly laughed in years. "Maybe he does," she whispered, forehead resting lightly against his. Her breath was warm, her words fragile. "Maybe that's the only reason you exist." She tightened her embrace once more, just once more, as if by sheer force she could will the galaxy to hold still, to not take him away. But then, slowly, Kaede let him go. Her fingers trailed down his jaw, a silken caress that lingered on his cheek. She gazed at him, not as an inquisitor, not as Kaede Shirohana, but as a woman who had dared to remember she once had a name that wasn't forged in blood. "Will you be here tomorrow?" she asked softly, voice trembling at the edge of something she didn't dare name. "At this ridiculous little tea house of yours?" Her eyes searched his, hungry for the answer, yet terrified of needing it. He looks up into her eyes and coughs gently before nodding. The fact is, his sickness ain't contagious whatsoever, but it is still killing him. Arturian speaks softly after a moment of surprised silence, says finally, "I definitely will be. I wouldn't go anywhere else for the world." He tells her truthfully. His green eyes meet her own dark ones. Heart-hammering, he looks away. Her psyche senses of a high empathic caliber would pick something up. They have talked each day for a little over a month in this rickety tea house. She would realise, this kid loves her. Kaede's gaze lingered a heartbeat longer than was safe, than was wise, than was hers to give. His eyes, those absurdly bright green eyes, far too vivid for this ash-choked world, looked away. but not fast enough to hide what surged behind them. Her heart knew before her mind dared admit it. He loved her. Her. Not the Inquisitor, not the mask, the monster, the legend. Her. She leaned forward gently with a care she did not show anyone. The hand that once held a fan stained with noble blood now brushed aside a lock of hair from his forehead. She pressed her lips there, soft, warm, reverent. A kiss not of power but of promise. "I'll hold you to that," she whispered, voice barely audible against his skin. Then she turned, straightened, and walked away. Her uchikake swept behind her in a crimson tide, untouched by the filth of the hive. The air shifted as she moved, commanding space, bending it. Even the dust seemed to step aside. Outside, the shadows welcomed her like an old lover. Calros appeared from them, always watching, always hoping. His face was tight, with restrained words, sharp with jealousy he no longer bothered to hide. "Have you grown tired of the little mouse yet?" he asked, too casual, too clipped. Kaede didn't stop walking. She simply let her gaze slide sideways, cold and calm, and said, "If you insult him again, I will kill you." No fanfare, no threat, just a decree. And then she walked past him like he was smoke, and she was wind, her voice trailing only once more as she gestured lazily with 2 fingers. "You may follow if you wish, or stay. I no longer care which." The message was clear, even to Calros. Whatever claim he thought he had over her, it ended here. Word gets out over the next 12 hours of a young sororitas who had been drawn to Arturian's warmth. It certainly wasn't the boy's looks, but simply how he had not been afraid of her. He had seen past her holier-than-thou act and simply told her to be herself. She was insulted, and even now she calmly prepares a formal letter to give to her superiors to have the boy accused of heresy. Yep, in the grimdark future, rejection, even if wrongly perceived, can be very dangerous. Miyumi, being a slick little spy with ties to the sororitas, gets Kaede's attention immediately. The young girl, not even 18 and still a novitiate, has no clue. Yeah, he screwed badly. No one expects the Inquisition, and there's no Monty Python this far in the future. She just now has rolled the writ into a scroll, preparing to have it sealed and sent via servitor to her superiors. The mere accusation is a death sentence. The scroll was almost sealed. The wax hovered inches from the heat of the candle, the servitor at the ready, its blank eyes awaiting the final command to deliver judgment in ink. The young novitiate, Sister Lexa, knelt in a temple prayer cell no wider than a confessional. She whispered prayers under her breath, lines drilled into her from the schola. "May the Emperor grant me sight to pierce through shadow, wrath to cleanse the impure." And yet, beneath those words, petty vengeance simmered, all because a boy, a sickly, too kind boy, had dared to see her. High above, in the spire of St. Nerelius, the silence cracked. Kaede stood at the centre of her sanctum, Miyumi kneeling beside her, head bowed low, scroll case extended in trembling hands. She didn't speak, she knew better. She merely waited. Kaede read the scroll. She didn't speak either. But her hand, clad in lacquered black, curled tightly around the fan she had not opened since her encounter the day before. "She used ecclesiarchal writ," Kaede said at last, voice sharp with incredulous disdain. "Against him." Her eyes flared, not with fire but with cold, glacial focus. She is a child playing at being a saint, mistaking bruised pride for divine vision. Kaede turned to Miyumi. "Where is she?" "The temple dormitory, west wing, novitiate cell block." Kaede's voice lowered into a deadly calm. "Does she know who he is to me?" Miyumi didn't dare look up. "No, Inquisitor. I don't believe she even knows your name." Kaede smiled. "Then she will learn." Moments later, the door to the novitiate's prayer cell hissed open, with a sound that should not echo in sanctified space. Sister Lexa turned, startled, still holding the seal over the final letter. Kaede stepped inside, her uchikake trailing ash-silent behind her. She did not walk, she arrived, as if summoned by the Emperor himself. She did not speak at first. She simply looked down upon the novitiate with a stare that could hollow worlds. Then she extended one gloved hand. "Give me the scroll." Not a request, not a question. An execution held at bay by a thread. Sister Lexa, pale and shaking now, clutched the scroll tighter. "I was following protocol. I have the right to." "You have the right," Kaede interrupted, voice like silk sliding across a blade, "to nothing you do not earn, and you've earned only this, my attention." The girl froze. Kaede stepped closer, no longer towering but looming, presence suffocating. "You would condemn a soul to fire," she hissed, "because he saw you." Then, in a whisper that scraped like glass, she added, "That boy is under my protection. His name was never yours to speak." The scroll burst into flame in Kaede's outstretched hand, a psychic flicker, precise and absolute. The ashes fluttered like moths and died in the air between them. "Pray harder, novitiate," she said, turning, voice venomous with cold humour. "You were seconds from damnation." And then she was gone, not walking but vanishing like a storm, leaving shattered silence behind. Tap. The folded fan touched the crown of Arturian's head with the precision of a practiced hand, firm but not cruel. More acclaim than a strike. A gesture that said, "I am here. I found you again." He blinked, startled, hand rising to rub the spot. His book tilted in his lap, momentarily forgotten as his wide green eyes met hers. Kaede was already lowering herself into the seat across from him, robes cascading like a blood-red waterfall. Her fan snapped open with a crack, and she laughed. Not a mocking cackle, but a low, delighted chime. "The look on your face," she said with an arched brow, "priceless, like a child caught stealing temple sweets." She leaned back, graceful, powerful, her eyes watching him with the kind of focus that saw more than surface, much more. Then her laughter faded, not abruptly, but as if it had simply passed through her like a moment of spring in winter. Her gaze softened just so, and her fan lowered slightly. "I'm glad to see you," she said quietly. No grandeur, no riddles, just truth. Her eyes didn't flinch. They stayed on him, reading every flicker of doubt, every phantom wound he tried to hide behind his book, and silence. "You kept your word," she added, voice nearly reverent. Then, after a moment, "Good?" He tilts his head and then actually laughs. It ain't at her, no, it is at her comment, as he then smiles gently. He tells her, "Of course, I wouldn't have gone anywhere than here for the world," he tells her. All this time, he hasn't shown her where he lives, but in the end, it is how things are. She would know anyways, since she has had some of her retinue follow him without being detected. He lives in a modest little place that only has a candle for light and books. Quite a few books, surprisingly enough. The boy then says, "I found this book here. Talk a little about your home planet, Tsukikage. Fascinating stuff, dynasties going back thousands of years, even before Old Terror. Part of me was thinking about moving on, actually a week ago. I tried to travel, to keep one step ahead from her." He, of course, had told her about Eleanor, his mother, yet he looks to her with a haunted gaze, an open one. "That's why I froze when you hugged me the other night. I enjoyed it, but sometimes while I definitely like the female gender, it scares me. I feel awful, even comparing you to that woman, but I felt I owed you an explanation." Little does he know, his fate was sealed with that confession. Kaede's fan stilled mid-sweep. His words struck deeper than any blade ever had. Not because they accused, but because they trusted. He had laid bare something no interrogator could extract, something she would have once shattered someone for even implying. And yet here he sat, speaking it plainly, openly to her. Her hand tightened around the fan's spine. Slowly, she closed it. It made no sound this time, as if the silence itself were bracing for what came next. She leaned forward, her poise immaculate, but her eyes, they were not the eyes of an inquisitor. They were Hisako's eyes, the girl buried beneath layers of titles, scars, and ceremonial silk. "I understand," she said softly, and for once her voice shook, "more than you can imagine." She drew in a slow breath, then released it, her gloved fingers brushing over the lacquered table as if anchoring herself. "Tsukikage," she said distantly, "was a place of masks, not just painted faces, lives made of illusion, polished, perfect, and beneath every mask was a daughter, a sister, a child, punished for feeling too much." Her eyes met his then, unguarded and steady. Every crack in her soul suddenly visible. "Last night," she continued, "when I held you, you reminded me of something I buried centuries ago, something real, and I've spent every hour since then walking the knife's edge of what to do with that feeling." She reached out, not to touch, not yet, but to connect. "So I'll ask you only once, Arturian Thraune." Her voice did not tremble now. "Do you love me? Not a whisper, not a challenge, a truth waiting to be named. If you say no," she added, and her voice softened again, "I will go. I will vanish into the stars, and Tharsis Echelon will never feel my shadow again. I won't chase you. I won't force this. You'll be free." She drew a breath, just slightly sharp, as if bracing for the blade. "But if you say yes, then you are mine, and I will never let you suffer again." The moment stretched, fragile, trembling with consequence, the weight of galaxies balanced on one broken boy's heart. And the term fate of galaxies. This is an exaggeration, yes, but the fate of billions or more? Yes, because if he says no, then she would simply be content with the portrait she has of him and continue her life, praying for him even after his death to the Emperor, but it would be a well and good memory. Maybe even it would give her comfort, but her path of self-destruction would spiral further and last longer. However, what he does instead is speeds it up by telling her, "Yes, I love you." It is all he knows to tell her. His voice shakes as he says this, the words hung in the air like the last notes of a requiem. "Yes, I love you." So simple, so fragile, and yet it was a truth that shattered her more than any blade, any heresy, any confession dragged screaming from a traitor's lips. Kaede looked into his eyes, those impossibly green eyes glowing with fear and truth and something purer than anything she'd known in centuries. She trembled. Not from weakness, but from the weight of it. The choice he had made, the anchor he had placed in her spiraling soul. She nodded, once, silently. Then she reached for him, fingers brushing his wrist, light at first. When he tensed, she felt it, that hesitation, that flicker of pain, born of memory, not mistrust. She understood, she smiled, and it was sad. So very sad, but it was also real. "No more words," she whispered, and then she moved. With one swift pull, she drew him to his feet, her grip sure and absolute. She did not ask. She did not wait. Her uchikake flared like wings behind her, sweeping across the floor with imperial grace as she strode from the tea house like a storm contained in silk and sorrow. The world did not exist. Only him. Only now. And wherever she was taking him, it was a place where Kaede could fall apart, and perhaps Hisako could be whole again. The halls of Hive Tharsis Echelon blurred into shadows and flickering lumen strips as Kaede led him, claimed him through service tunnels and forgotten passages only her retinue knew existed. Her grip on his wrist was firm, commanding, inescapable. She felt him tense, felt his body resist just enough to betray his fear, but never once did he pull away. And the thoughts, "Emperor, help her," the thoughts bled from him like ink in water. "I'm afraid, oh God, I'm scared. But I don't want to run. She deserves better than that." Kaede faltered just once. A breath caught, a step slowed. It shattered her, not because he feared her, that was expected, but because he feared and stayed. No one did that, not ever. They feared and fled. They feared and lied. They feared and bled under her interrogation tools until nothing human remained. But he stayed. When they reached the sealed chamber, a forgotten observatory above the hive's smog line, half sanctum, half tomb, Kaede paused only to enter her override code. The doors hissed open with reverent silence. The room was vast, circular, filled with hanging silks, ward-laced lanterns and a single divan at its centre, a place no one but her retinue and she had ever entered. Now he would. Inside she didn't speak. She simply turned, looked at him, really looked, and then without hesitation pulled him into her arms. Her strength was undeniable. Her frame, unarmoured but still powerful, eclipsed him easily. She outweighed him, outmatched him, and still she held him as if he were breakable glass wrapped around a candle's flame. "You're mine," she whispered, voice trembling, lips near his ear. "No more running, no more fear. You belong to me now." Her fingers threaded through his hair. "I will not let you go, ever." And in that sacred silence, with the warp-weave stars flickering through the dome above them, Kaede Shirohana, monster, saint and weapon, made a vow to the boy who had undone her. The moment hung suspended in silence, thick with unspoken truths and shared wounds. Kaede's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him, truly looked. His fear, his bravery, the ache in his green eyes, the thoughts still echoing in her mind, raw and unfiltered, and the sheer impossibility of what he had given her. Not obedience, not devotion, but love freely offered. Her composure cracked. With one fluid motion she leaned in. Her hands, trembling slightly, cradled his face. Silk and strength. Her uchikake spilled around them like the petals of a dying flower as she closed the distance. And then she kissed him. They are able to get cleaned up. The stench of release is also no longer in the air so strongly. They sit in one of her seats, the boy perched comfortably in her lap. Arturian's clothing, due to it having been sliced off before their moment of passion, is given a pair of pants and a shirt. Slightly too big for him. Kaede doesn't have much foresight. Her abilities are more empathic, but she does have some. This intimate moment had been a possibility foreseen by her sharp mind. He spasms, sore and very worn out, nuzzling into her neck. Her own form is dressed in a kimono that is light and relaxed in fit. He asks her softly, "So where do we go from here?" Kaede listened to his question, the warmth of his breath brushing against her neck as he nuzzled in, worn and sore yet comforted. Her hand gently stroked his back beneath the oversized shirt, her shirt technically, and her other rested lightly on his thigh, grounding them both in this fragile peace. "Where do we go from here?" She sighed, not with regret, but with the slow exhale of someone who already carried the answer. "I cannot take you off-world," she said softly, truth cloaked in tenderness. Rhiannon's kiss reacts unpredictably to the stresses of space travel. Not just the warp, the pressure shifts, the sterile void, the silence. Even without warp exposure, deep space is fatal for sufferers like you. Her fingers tightened gently, her lips brushing his temple. "I will not risk that." She let that truth hang between them a moment longer before continuing, voice steady but gentler now. "But I must leave. Briefly. A convocation of the Ordo. The others gather to report their contributions, a recital of purges, conversions, burned cities." There was something between scorn and boredom in her voice, but it passed quickly. "It will be short. No warp routes, only a transit to a bastion moon nearby. I'll be gone no more than 2 weeks." Then, with a grace that was almost reverent, she reached for her uchikake. She unfolded the crimson, seal-stitched silk and wrapped it around them both. The fabric settled heavily, like a final vow. "I will return," she whispered, "before this silk forgets your warmth." And for a moment, all the stars beyond the glass dome could do was watch. The woman is forced to depart within the hour, and of course he cannot stay in this sealed chamber. Kaede is a lot of things, but she ain't a jailer of those she loves. In fact, she flat refuses. She lets him go, and of course returns him back to the tea house, and he heads back to his small home. Kalrus says to her when she prepares to go off-world, "I wish you well. You made your choice, and I have made mine. You gave me the freedom to go back home. In fact, maybe I will do that. It's been a while since I walked Sephramorda's fields and talked to my family. I wish you well and good tidings." Kaede stood before the transport's boarding ramp. Her uchikake pulled close around her as the cold, filtered wind of the launch platform stirred the ends of her hair. The ship's engines purred low in the distance, awaiting her ascent, like a beast that dared not roar without her command. Kalrus approached, silent, steady, worn. She turned only slightly at the sound of his boots, sensing the weight in his steps. Then he spoke. "I wish you well. You made your choice, and I have made mine. You gave me the freedom to go back home. In fact, maybe I will do that. It's been a while since I walked Sephramorda's fields and talked to my family. I wish you well and good tidings." She blinked, just once. Surprise flickered behind her eyes. Not because he was leaving, but because he was choosing to. Kaede looked at him fully now. For a long, quiet moment she said nothing, simply taking him in, the weathered lines around his mouth, the way he stood with dignity even now, even wounded, not by battle, but by something older. She had never thought Kalrus weak, nor a fool. He simply could not breach the walls she'd raised around herself long before he arrived. And now another had, without even trying. She snapped her fan open with a soft crack, lifting it before her face, not to obscure herself from him, but to armour the rawness of the moment. A defence old as her masks. "You were an honour to command," she said, voice like silk cut with steel, "and a greater one to trust. Few have stood beside me as long as you did, even fewer with your loyalty." Her eyes softened just enough to be real. "Go with grace, Kalrus. May your field still bloom, and your name be remembered fondly among your blood." She paused, then lowered the fan a little, just enough for him to see her mouth curve in a faint, tired smile. "Be safe." And just like that, the moment passed, and the Inquisitor turned toward her ship. But she did not forget. The fact is, Kaede had seen this coming, and actually hired a very vicious brute with talents named Ray's Vesh to replace him. He, simply put, for one ain't into females, and he is loyal, unflinchingly due to having owed the woman a favour years ago. This man is now her new interrogator. Her retinue, which of course included this maniac, Miyumi, and 3 other acolytes, is evident. One is a powerful sanctioned psyker named Balthazar. The other is a survivor of Katakan's jungles, that planet's only export. The last is a former chrono gladiator who has no name but is loyal due to the fact he was given freedom. That, and he doesn't have to do much, just be her personal bodyguard, a simple thing for a simple mind. The enclave on the moon of Gethrun Thave is an existential nightmare. No atmosphere, and a local population of non-breathing mechanical horrors that are called screamers. Yes, the screamers from the movie. Years after that, some of the Ordo had found files on those things and turned them loose on the moon itself. People who ain't invited end up dead, chopped to pieces by those things. Even now, there are 2 other Inquisitors gathered. One, a man named Björgen, a fairly laid-back, even if deadly man in his own right. The other is a woman named Adrasia Valkos, a very zealous and dangerous female. She also is a natural competition for that of Kaede. The 2 hate each other, yet respect is there. Adrasia smirks and leans back in her chair. Oh look, the princess has arrived. Adrasia is not vain at all. In fact, she is one that is similar to the now dead Greyfax in how she dresses. Extremely severe and cruel. Kaede entered the sanctum with a stride like a blade drawn too slowly. Measured, lethal, and impossible to ignore. Her uchikake swept behind her like a tide of blood and scripture, its sacred weight unsettling even the servitors stationed at the entrance. Behind her came her retinue, silent shadows of purpose. Razvesh moved like a predator without a leash. His face bore no emotion, only resolve and cold calculation. Miyumi, quiet but attentive, lingered near Balthazar, who kept his third eye closed but twitched subtly at every psychic ripple in the room. The chrono gladiator, faceless and massive, stood just behind her with the patience of a statue built for war. And the Katakan woman, Juno, remained as relaxed and coiled as a serpent watching the sun. The room itself, a hollow cathedral in a fortress carved into a moon of death, was built from blackstone, reinforced adamantium, and utter distrust. Outside, the atmosphere was poison, and the shrieking echoes of the screamers ensured silence was not a mercy, but a threat. Kaede's eyes scanned the chamber. Her gaze briefly locked with Inquisitor Björgen, who offered a small, knowing nod, neutral, amused, and unreadable. Then it settled on Adrasia Valkos. The tension between them was chemical. Adrasia sat back, arms folded, smirking like a blade that knew it had already cut. "Oh, look, the princess has arrived." Kaede rolled her eyes, slow, theatrical. "A pity. I thought this was a closed council. Apparently jesters were let in through the ash vents." Before the verbal duel could escalate, a shadow fell across the room as Inquisitor Lord Ignatius Gallows stood. Massive, robed in black and ivory, his eyes like extinguished stars, his voice the weight of judgment made flesh. "Enough, Valkos." His tone did not rise, it did not need to. "All of you, present your reports." "Yes, I know. Paperwork is a soul-killing endeavour. If I had the authority to make this entire exercise disappear, I would have. But you all know the score. The Lords want numbers, metrics, justification for the blood spilled in your names." He looked around the room like a hangman choosing necks. "You don't have to like it, you just have to deliver." Kaede reached into her sleeve, produced a scroll, and flicked it across the table without ceremony. It landed dead centre. "Pity," she murmured. "I had so looked forward to someone calling me excessive again." Balthazar would roll his eyes if he wasn't currently monitoring everything. His third eye, while not physical, is evident. He is troubled by something, but in the end he cannot say what. It isn't anything here, no. It is something he cannot explain. Raze leans against a wall, tossing a dagger into the air and catching it. Juno smacks him upside the head irritably. The chrono gladiator with no name simply chuckles, his memories actually mirroring memories of humour. Adrasia's retinue are rather stuck up, but also ones who are actually relieved by Kaede's group. Björgen is alone. He rarely takes a retinue except when needed. He casually looks to Kaede and says, "You excessive?" "Nah!" He tosses his own sealed reports onto the table. Adrasia pinches her nose and mumbles under her breath about being surrounded by idiots, but it is with a smirk. She tosses her own records into the pile. Ignatius reads them all. It takes 9 hours to do so. Oh, joy. When finished, he looks to them all. "Adrasia, you are aware of why they call you Greyfax 2-0, right?" The woman snorts. Look, she was efficient at what she did. Who cares if some low-born idiots burn? Ignatius doesn't lash out. They are all guilty of horrors, and his hypocrisy goes so far. Noted, but be careful. Remember Kiyomoro, the fool who tried to cheat his own death? Just think on it. Now, Jurgen, you're as straightforward as always, but do try to show some more restraint when getting information. It is excessive attempts to impress that leads to paperwork like this. He then looks to Kaede and says, like always, excessive, way too fracking excessive. You suddenly decided to burn the city Tharsis Omega instead of Hive Tharsis? Bah, Varelian Secundus is so backwater you didn't even choose one for the other. Whatever reason, you can have it, I want to know, zilch. Adrastia smirks. Like her love life, right? Björgen throws a pencil at the woman's head, which is caught by the blonde woman. Your aim still sucks, idiot. Pietro sighs. Thank the Emperor, I won't have to deal with you 3 idiots for another 5 years. Get out of here. Better yet, run. He says with a chortle. Kaede's Uchikake rustled as she shifted slightly in her seat, eyes half-lidded in that regal way that somehow always suggested both boredom and lethal potential. Balthazar stood nearby, his brow furrowed, expression distant, not focused on the room but on something else. Something that tugged faintly at his mind from far away, a whisper he couldn't quite hear. The warp did not scream here, but it waited. Ray's dagger spun, gleamed, caught again, until Juno smacked him upside the head with a muttered curse about fidgety bastards. The chrono gladiator gave a rumbling chuckle, old reflexive mirth surfacing from whatever life he might have once lived before. Circuits measured his worth in seconds. Kaede watched the farce with quiet amusement. Björgen's dry jab made her lift her fan in salute, hiding a faint smirk. Charming as ever, she murmured. Adrastia pinched her nose in theatrical agony, muttering about fools. Her smirk, however, betrayed the familiarity of this theatre. They were all monsters playing at order, each with a different mask. 9 hours of reports followed, of death, numbers, seared parchment, and sanctioned genocide. And then Gallows, in all his booming wariness, began his judgments. Adrastia's flippant reference to Greyfax earned her a stern warning, wrapped in the story of a dead Inquisitor and the echo of a lesson she'd ignore. Björgen got the usual warning, less flair, fewer corpses, less damnable paperwork. Then came Kay's turn. Like always, Ignatius grumbled, excessive. Way too fracking excessive. You suddenly decided to burn Tharsis Omega instead of Hive Tharsis? Bah, Varelian Secundus is so backwater you didn't even choose one for the other. Whatever reason, you can have it. I want to know zilch. Kaede's fan snapped closed with a soft click. She almost sighed in relief. Almost. They hadn't found out. No whispers, no strange footnotes. No unexplained boy in a tea house spared the fire. Then Adrastia's voice, sharp as ever. Like her love life, right? Kaede didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back and drawled, voice like wine laced with venom. Perhaps you should try having one yourself, Adrastia. You might be less of a frigid bitch that way. The room cracked with Björgen's laughter. The pencil was already in flight before she caught it, smooth, practiced, unamused. Gallows simply groaned, Emperor, save me from you all. I won't have to deal with you 3 idiots for another 5 years. Get out of here. Better yet, run. Kaede rose with the elegance of a curtain falling on a final act. Come, my monsters, she said lightly to her retinue. Let's leave the dying to their paperwork. Before she can board her ship after her retinue, Adrastia grabs her by the elbow and takes her to the side. Yes, the two despise each other to a point, yet there is respect, and surprisingly, they work well together. She speaks softly. Listen here, you slant-eyed whore. I have a better way of serving than you do. That's how things go. But since you won't ever change, I will give you some advice. If I ever found out anything, I would of course try to burn all you've built. But that is if I looked, and I don't have time to waste with your pathetic existence. But listen to what I say carefully. Sometimes those you trust the most can take away what you ever loved to begin with. Maybe that's how I became this frigid bitch you think I am. So unless you want to become me, watch your butt, all right? She arrogantly lets her go. Yet the subtle nod from one of the closest things Kaede has to a friend speaks volumes. Leaving Kaede to her thoughts, Adrastia's grip was like iron, sharp, precise, and impossible to ignore. The words she hissed weren't shouted, but they carved like scalpels, sharp-edged with venom and something older. Pain. a scar too deep for even zealotry to fully mask. Kaede didn't respond. She didn't draw her fan, didn't turn away with contempt. She simply stood, listening, taking in every barbed syllable, not just for its insult, but for its meaning. Because Adrastia Valkos, for all her severity and cruelty, didn't waste words. Not when they mattered, and this time, they mattered. Sometimes those you trust the most can take away what you ever loved to begin with. The words rang too close, too real. Adrastia let her go with that arrogant flick of the wrist, that noble disdain neither of them could quite seem to discard, even now. Kaede didn't speak. She simply nodded, just once. Subtle, not deference, acknowledgement. As Adrastia vanished into the corridor beyond, Kaede stood still for a moment, the weight of the Uchiakake seeming heavier than it had before. And then the ache hit her, deep, gnawing, not of fear or anger, but need. She missed him, his scent, his warmth, the way he said her name like it didn't belong to a monster. Her fan trembled slightly in her hand. The urge to get back to him surged so powerfully it nearly drove her to the deck. Her soul, it hurt, but Adrastia's words lingered. Unless you want to become me, watch your butt. Kaede inhaled slowly. Let the breath sink deep into her center, the way the monks of Tsukikage once taught her when she was still Hisako. She turned, walked toward her ship, and behind her the echo of that warning curled around her steps like a phantom. On the way back, the travel through space takes a little over a week. Reyes looks to Kaede, tossing his dagger into the air and then catching it. He tilts his head, speaking to her. Juno has a big fucking mouth. She also has a point. Yes, I know you don't appreciate us blathering about you without your say-so. Unfortunately, us plebeians, yeah, I love that word. We have to have things to do. Plus, you also hired me because unlike Kuntress, I ain't a sycophant, but I want what's best for you since you pay well. If you like a tea-sipping mouse of a kid, more power to you. My taste in men is different, but hey, whatever. Love like that is rare and too short. Rhiannon's kiss is no goddamn joke. No cure either, so enjoy him. He walks off, and even now, she would feel fear like something is bound to happen and she cannot stop it. Kaede sat in the dim chamber aboard her personal void cutter, wrapped not in the Uchiakake, but in a far simpler robe, plain, soft, as close to vulnerability as she allowed herself outside of one boy's presence. The silence of space was absolute, save for the hum of the engines and the faint murmur of distant Vox relays. Then came the click of Reyes' boots, his rhythm always a touch too casual, too confident. The flash of his dagger caught the low lumen light as it spun and fell back into his waiting hand with bored precision. He spoke, blunt as ever. Kaede didn't look at him directly. She didn't need to. He was what he claimed. Not a sycophant, but loyal in his own abrasive, knife-edged way. As he finished, her fingers tightened slightly on the armrest of her seat. She gave a small, imperious nod, a gesture of understanding, and a silent dismissal. Reyes, perceptive in his own way, turned on his heel with a shrug and walked off. No further needling, no smug grin, just the facts, spoken plainly. And once the door closed behind him, Kaede allowed herself a slow breath. Her fingers flexed again, restless. He was right. Two Raiden's kiss. No cure, no appeal, no clemency from time. She could feel it now, that quiet wrongness, the way the warp whispered more faintly than usual. The way her empathic senses curled in on themselves, not screaming, but tensing. Something was coming. She couldn't see it, couldn't stop it, but she felt it, like a cold draft under a sealed door. She hissed under her breath, voice sharp and bitter. Damn the slowness of void travel. Her fingers curled into her robes. She needed to be back. Now. They get back easily enough, and it ain't an easy trip. Kaede had actually come back to Verelion Secundus faster than she even imagined herself. Hive Tharsis Echelon is as silent as it has always been this late at night. Arturian isn't found at the tea house, no. However, she does know where the boy lives, not even a block away. She has never been here, but when she knocks and no response, she knows something is wrong. She doesn't waste time. She is by herself, but it doesn't matter. The door doesn't open, yet a quick swipe with her Tesson slices open the lock. What she finds is horror. The boy that is Arturian is naked. He always prayed naked. Heck, she knows this from spying on the boy via drone or other usage of gathering intelligence. He is curled in on himself, his nose shattered, his eyes swollen shut, his ribs are shattered and both his arms broken in wrong angles. His right knee is bent in backwards and his ribs shattered. 2 at least. He spasms on the floor. Opening one eye, he says softly, "I'm sorry," before fading into oblivion. The moment Kaede stepped into the boy's home, her breath caught like a blade lodged in her throat. The dim candlelight flickered against blood on the walls. Her uchikake swept the floor behind her, silken silence broken only by the trembling rasp of his breath. And then she saw him, curled, broken, so small, so helpless. Arturian lay naked in the dust, his body twisted by violence. His ribs jutted like splinters beneath skin already bruising purple-black. Both arms shattered, one leg bent in a grotesque inversion. His face barely resembled the one she kissed not 2 weeks ago. Swollen, bloodied, eye sealed shut, the other barely clinging to consciousness. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then darkness. Kaede didn't scream, she didn't sob, she moved. Her uchikake was gone in a flash, spread wide and reverent like a funeral shroud. She wrapped it around him, layer after layer of crimson silk, like she was trying to smother death itself. Her breath trembled. Her eyes did not. Her fan, her tesson, lay covered with rust and dirt at her side from the door she had sliced open. She did not draw it again. She saw it, in his pain, in the echoes of his soul, Calrus. She saw his hand in every shattered joint, every fractured rib. The betrayal burned so cold it numbed her fingers, but there was no time. If he stayed here, he died. She scooped him up, careful, impossibly gentle for someone so strong. Every spasm in his body felt like it was happening in her own. And then Kaede Shirohana ran, through alleyways and soot-stained streets, her feet barely touching the ground, every breath a prayer she hadn't said since she was a girl. Her silken kimono tore against sharp stone, her hair came undone. Her presence, normally poised, distant, was now a storm of desperation. She didn't care if someone saw her. Let the hive see the Inquisitor reduced to a woman clutching her dying beloved like a mother running from the pyres. He will live, she told herself. He must. Kaede did not take him to a public medicae. She didn't trust them, not with him, not with the depth of his wounds, nor the fragile, flickering light of his life she felt pressed against her chest. There was only one place. Beneath hive Tharsis Echelon, far beneath even the sub-administratum sectors, there lay a forgotten bastion once used to stabilize wounded inquisitors during the Age of Apostasy. Long since scrubbed from imperial records, it had been maintained quietly over the centuries by a loyal few. One of them, a medicae primus named Dr. Lyron Callis, owed Kaede more than a few favours, and unlike most, he asked no questions. She arrived at the hidden entrance, a carved arch of faded gold plate, sealed behind false walls and vox-locked pathways. She gave no command. Her voice, thick with restrained emotion, whispered one word. "Open." The stone parted. The door obeyed. Inside, the medicae chamber was sterile, polished, sanctified. White tile floors gleamed, etched with wards to soothe psychers and calm trauma. Servo gurneys drifted silently. Cherubim flickered in the air like guardian wisps. Dr. Callis looked up. He was already gloved and waiting, his bald head gleaming under lumen strips, surgical robes black with gold trim. He didn't ask what had happened. He saw Kaede's face, truly saw it, and knew. The boy was taken from her arms with impossible care. Scanners were lowered, stasis injectors whispered into his flesh. Machines clicked. Priests chanted minor rites of pain suppression. Kaede stood frozen, her uchikake stained with blood, silk clinging to her body. Her hands still outstretched where he had been. Callis looked up only once. "I will do everything," he said, voice low, reverent. "I swear it." Kaede didn't thank him. She simply nodded, lips trembling, and whispered, "If he dies, so do you all." Then she collapsed into a nearby chair, body rigid, face unreadable, but her soul burned. The boy's body is monitored closely. The facts are a simple one, really. The luck of the boy waking up is not there. In fact, it is slim as it gets. Callis works feverishly and actually is able to get his ribs set as well as his knee replaced. There's no way to fix it. It has to be replaced. His arms, while damaged and broken, are set and easily repaired with the right equipment. Callis looks to her once it is done, noticing the look of emptiness in the Inquisitor's eyes. The man says softly, "I won't ask questions, but I have done what I can." His skull was severely fractured and his nose nearly shoved into his brain. His assailant intended to kill him, but failed, thank God. There is brain damage, however, but not from that attempt. It is from the concussion. I will be straightforward. You pay me to do as such. He will most likely die. The Rhiannon's kiss complicated my efforts, but the chance of him fully recovering is nil. What I can do is make sure he is comfortable until he dies. If he wakes up, that might be different. Of course he will die, but his quality of life will be better than this. He gestures to the boy, who spasms silently on the bed. That is a nervous response. That doesn't mean he even knows you are here. He speaks the truth. The boy's brain activity is zilch. Kaede stood still as Callus delivered his verdict. Every word felt like another incision, methodical, sterile, and necessary. She didn't move, didn't blink. The light of the Medicare unit flickered over her face, painting her features in ghost light. Arturian lay still, too still. Wrapped in bandages, his arms carefully bound in place, his chest gently rising with the aid of thin, hissing Medicare tubing. His head was partially shaved to access the skull, the lines of surgery sharp and cruel, his face barely recognizable. Callus's voice was soft, clinical, honest. If he wakes up, that might be different, but his quality of life, brain activity, is nil. She didn't flinch, not until he said those words. Then only a quiet breath left her. She nodded, slowly once, a gesture of command and of mourning. Leave, she said, her voice hoarse. I will send word if there is change. Callus hesitated, but only for a moment. He'd seen warlords bargain, sorcerers scream, and generals pray in silence under her gaze. This was different. Worse. He bowed. Understood. But Inquisitor, if he doesn't wake, tell me before you burn the city. I'll get my people out. Kaede said nothing. She only inclined her head again. When he left, the silence became absolute. She walked slowly to the bedside, her every step mechanical. Then, gently, she knelt down beside him, careful to avoid the rib dressings, and pressed her head to his stomach, away from the fractures, away from the machines. And then she wept, not the quiet, noble tears of a wounded saint. She wept like a girl who had been shattered, like Hisako Sayuri was still buried somewhere beneath Inquisitor Kaede Shirohana, clawing her way to the surface with raw, bloodied hands. She whispered his name through her sobs, again and again, as if that alone could call him back. The boy's chest rises and falls. Of course, he is next to naked, so the tubes and wire aren't obstructed. The lesions or simple discolorations are things too easily seen. It is an ironic thing, really. The scratches and light bruises, even the light teeth marks she left, are mostly healed to a degree. Eleanor's marks of abuse from 4 years prior still remain. It is almost a slap in Kaede's face, even though it ain't avoidable. Such is the way of the grimdark future. As she weeps, her thick and long hair, a blanket of ebony around the boy's body, is evident, but in the end, there is no reprieve. Kaede leaned in, her breath catching as she pressed her lips to his bruised, bandaged forehead. The gesture was feather-light, too light for the way her heart broke against it. Her long hair spilled forward, cloaking his battered body like silk-shadowed wings. His skin still bore the marks, not hers, not recent ones. Those had faded, but the old ones. Eleanor's scars, years old, still there, still mocking her. Even now she couldn't erase them. Even now she wasn't enough to bring him back. Days passed, then a week, then 2, then a month. The Medicae teams monitored his vitals. His body stabilized, the damage to his ribs, his arms, his leg repaired. Internally, his organs adjusted. Rhiannon's kiss was still ever present, but dormant. But his mind, the machines remained flat. His eyes never opened. He breathed, but didn't live. And one day, Kaede stood in the chamber, eyes dry, shoulders squared. No more tears, no more prayers, only purpose. She moved without ceremony, unhooking each tube, smooth, practiced, decisive. No alarms triggered. Her override codes stopped all interference. She gathered him into her arms. He weighed nothing to her, but to her soul he was everything. Her ship was waiting. Within its sanctum, behind reinforced alloy and woven blackstone, she'd had a chamber prepared, just in case. A room no one but her could enter. Its walls lined with low humming psychic insulation, lit with soft gold luminance. In the centre, a stasis cradle, normally used for relics too holy or cursed to decay. She laid him there with care befitting a saint. The field of her life, locking time around his body. He would not heal. He would not worsen. He would simply wait, just like her. On her way back through the hive, cloaked and veiled, she passed through one of the mid-tier plazas. A pair of smug-faced off-duty enforcers walked by, sipping synthetic liquor. One chuckled, pointing lazily at her retreating silhouette. "Damn, you see that? Lady like that carrying a wreck like him? What, did she dig him out of the trash for fun?" Laughter. Muted. Cruel. Kaede didn't turn. She didn't have to. The decision crystallized then, sharp and final. Hive Tharsis Echelon would burn, not because of rebellion, not because of quotas, but because it had dared to mock what she loved. And in the grimdark future, no one walked away from such heresy. Not anymore. Kaede stood aboard her ship, just above the atmosphere of Varelion Secundus, Hive Tharsis Echelon now a jewel of flickering lights in the void below. Her silhouette was wreathed in shadow, her uchikake trailing like a funeral banner behind her as she stepped into the command sanctum. Before her, the hololithic projection of the hive spun, rotating slowly, mockingly, unaware of its own finality. Her crew said nothing. They knew. She raised her fan, folded high above her head, then brought it down in a single deliberate motion. Ignite the sanctified charges. The command relayed instantly to ground teams to servitor payloads buried weeks ago in the hive's vital arteries. Munitorum vaults, promethium veins, shrine reactors. Placed as part of a contingency. A purge never planned, yet always ready. On the ground? It began with sirens. Not the usual warbling tones of security breaches, but the long, low howl of the Inquisition's fire writ. Civilians froze mid-step, habs locked, vox grids glitched, emergency lighting flared blood red. Then heat. The floor trembled as igniters buried beneath the hive's mid-spires detonated. Plasma fire surged upward, melting steel and bone in equal measure. Choir chapels exploded from within, saints' visages scorched into molten ruin. Civ militia units screamed as their vox links became static, then screaming, then silence. One mother clutched her child in the shadow of a broken statue, her voice lost as the ceiling above liquefied into a curtain of fire. From the upper walkways, nobles screamed as the air turned to gas and their lungs shriveled from within. No warning, no mercy, no salvation. Kaede watched it all unfold. "Let them understand," she said softly to no one in particular. "This is what happens when the galaxy mocks the sacred." The projection flared as secondary charges lit, whole districts incinerated in controlled sequence, a burning pattern resembling the sigil of the Inquisition itself. Hive Tharsis Echelon died in prayer and agony, and Kaede Shirohana, cold, aching, and empty, stood alone with the only soul who had loved her locked in stasis, and the ashes of millions left as her requiem. The horror cannot be denied, and millions, almost a billion, burn in swift agony. There is no redemption for the hive-city, none whatsoever. It simply will be put up as Kaede trying to one-up Adrasia in her zeal. In fact, Adrasia had told her not long ago, if one wants to cover up something, this is the best way to do so, and given each woman's history, it makes sense. There, however, are other plans that Kaede has, none of them cute. Eleanor Thraune is a woman of surprising means. She isn't pretty by conventional standards, no. However, she does have wit, and the fact she is married to Isaac Thraune speaks for itself. She and Isaac have relocated to a small settlement on the outskirts of Ceres. The one that is Isaac silently knocks back his cheap booze mixed with very illegal and cheap stems gruffly. He is not a tall man, but he is powerfully built. The former guardsman scolds, not even understanding why he is being interrupted. He perks a brow, having heard the tapping of boots and the whisper of silk across the floor, not even looking back. "I left the fucking killing business a long time ago. Why are you here?" The air inside the shack was thick with fumes, cheap alcohol and cheaper stim vapors, soaked into every fibre of the walls like the sweat of forgotten sins. The lighting was poor, flickering from a salvaged lumen strip hanging by a single wire, casting shadows like twisted fingers across the floor. Kaede stepped through the door with the grace of judgment incarnate. No entourage, no heralds, just her. Her boots tapped softly on the plasteel floor. Her uchikake whispered behind her, blood-red silk coiling like smoke in her wake. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. This place had no secrets. Isaac Thraune sat in a half-broken chair, his arm draped over a bottle filled with regret and venom. He didn't turn to face her, but his voice was a growl. "I left the fucking killing business a long time ago. Why are you here?" Kaede didn't hesitate. Her voice cut through the haze like a scalpel. I know who you are, Isaac Thraune. She took a step forward, just enough to let her shadow fall across him. And I want to know exactly what happened between the time you left that rotten hive and the moment your whore of a wife tearing your son apart while you were off playing ghosts and guns. Her tone was calm, measured. Not anger, condemnation. You can tell me now in plain speech while your tongue still works, or I can have you strapped to an excruciation cradle, pumped full of neural shock and exposed to a penal psyker whose only joy in life is tasting pain through the minds of others. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to let the pale light kiss the edge of her eye. You've got one chance, guardsman. The weight of her words and the casual truth in them hung in the air like the scent of fire before a storm. The man surprisingly doesn't blanch in terror, but he is angry regardless. He snarls softly. I recognize the seal, Inquisitor. I've heard of you, and I know you burned Virelian Secundus to the ground, to the molecule. I don't care why. Not my problem. As for my wife, you're right, she is a whore. She whored herself out before I married her, diddled with our own son. I couldn't cast him out, you know. It was a fate worse than death out there, and I couldn't kill her. She is all I had, they both were. So judge me all you want, I have served. As for where she is, she's not even 3 blocks away from this pub. Sector 2-4, our house is the last to the end. He moves swiftly, reaching for his stub pistol. Isaac's growl was full of broken years and rot. He spat truth like poison, each word laced with guilt, hate, and the fatal kind of honesty that only comes from a man who has already given up. He didn't flinch at her title, didn't tremble at her threats, but he moved. Quick. Desperate. His hand darted to the side, toward a half-rusted stub pistol beneath the bar. Reyes, leaning in the doorway, pushed off the wall, his eyes narrowing, hand reaching for his blade. But Kaede didn't wait. She never waited. 2 thin, gleaming spikes slipped from her Uchikake's sleeve like fangs from a serpent. With a motion too fast to track, she hurled them, whip-snap precision, honed from centuries of training. Crack! One embedded through his left palm, pinning it to the bar. Thunk! The second nailed his right. Isaac screamed, half standing, mouth open, but before the sound could truly escape, snap! Kaede's fan opened with a whisper of silk and steel, and with one graceful, fluid movement, she swept the fan in a horizontal arc across his throat. A kiss of monomolecular death. Blood sprayed, arterial and bright, across the bottles behind the bar. Isaac's body sagged, twitching against the wood as he gurgled one last curse through a mouthful of blood. Kaede leaned in, voice like velvet over glass. Thank you for your service. Mocking. Beautiful. Final. She watched him die with all the warmth of a winter shrine. And when his twitching stopped, she closed her fan again with a gentle click, like punctuation on a prayer. Then she turned to Reyes. Sector 2-4, find her. No mercy would be given to Eleanor. Not now. Isaac was a strong man, and in his youth he might have had a chance, but now? Nah, he is very dead and was when she entered the door. Reyes pinches his nose and then exhales gently. I'll make sure to get her. The crowd that witnesses don't even pay him any mind. Isaac was obviously not well liked, yet it is obvious that Arturian had gotten his intelligence from this fellow. Such is the way of the former Cervantes, now the Thraune legacy. Descended from prehistory and pre-emperor horrors known as the Nephilim themselves, and conquistadors, the family is one of survivors and tragedy. Reyes calls in via Voxcom as Isaac is carted out to be incinerated for fuel in the fires. Hey, I found her, and she put up a fight. Woo boy did she. She's alive. Want me to kill her, or you got plans? Kaede stood motionless among the silence Isaac's death had left behind, the scent of blood mingling with smoke and cheap liquor. The bar patrons barely looked up. Isaac Thraune had long since burned any sympathy from those around him. He died as he lived, loud, loathed, and alone. Her fan clicked shut with a sound that echoed in her bones. The Vox crackle snapped in her ear a moment later. Reyes. Hey, I found her, and she put up a fight. Woo boy did she. She's alive. Want me to kill her, or you got plans? Kaede's jaw didn't tense. Her posture didn't shift. But the temperature inside her, if it could have been measured, would have read as hellfire. She spoke in a low, even voice. Her dialect slipped, Tsukikage tongue like silk wrapped around razors. No, incapacitate the Kegareona. The term rolled out cold, defiled woman, a word reserved for the irredeemable. Bring her to the ship. Do not speak to her. Do not let her speak. If she resists again, break her knees. Her tone was death-given etiquette, emotionless. But beneath that calm, every fibre of Kaede's soul screamed, not for revenge, not for justice, but because she had seen the ruin of her boy, her moth, and the one who left those marks still breathed. That, she would correct, personally. The woman that is Eleanor awakens, restrained and placed in a metal chair, a simple thing really. Oh, and there are screws in the chair in the shape of spikes. She currently is naked as a jaybird, with the exception of a thin shift that does jack to protect her legs from being, well, cut into by screws the shape of spikes. Her vision clears as she looks up. Her features are surprisingly boyish, not ugly at all. Isaac had even paid for cosmetic treatments to enhance her looks, even if she isn't pretty by conventional standards. Eleanor tries to speak, but she is in too much shock at first. She asks softly, "Why? Who in the Emperor are you?" Blood flows from her legs where the screws cut into her flesh. The chamber was cold, intentionally so. Not frigid, but enough to make flesh feel every inch of exposed skin. The light was dim but surgical, illuminating only the chair and the woman bound to it. Everything beyond that small radius of vision was shadows and silence. Eleanor blinked as her vision cleared, confusion giving way to discomfort, then pain. The chair beneath her was no mere restraint, it was a slow punishment. Screws driven through its seat and back, shaped like jagged spikes, dug into her legs and lower back. Blood pooled slowly, trickling down her thighs, staining the thin shift she'd been given. It did nothing to protect her. Her voice cracked. "Why? Who in the Emperor are you?" The air shimmered slightly, then came the sound. Crack, soft, precise. The sound of silk and steel. Kaede snapped her fan open. The movement was slow, deliberate. She stepped forward into the circle of light, her uchikake catching the glow and bleeding crimson into the shadows. Her head tilted, just slightly like a predator considering. Her voice was calm, silken, but in it lurked something far colder than hate. "You are unfit to speak the Emperor's name." She took another step, the fan raised like a priest's icon. Her gaze never wavered. "I know everything, Eleanor Thraune." Another step, closer now. "Your son is in stasis, broken, shattered, because of you, because of what you did when no one was watching." Kaede's eyes narrowed. "And your husband, Isaac?" She smiled then. "He's burning." The word was said with such quiet finality it might as well have been carved into the air. Not metaphorically, not in memory, literally. His body is ash in a furnace. His soul, if there is justice, is being peeled apart in whatever damned oubliette awaits the worst of humanity. She paused, fan still open. "You are next." The smile vanished, and the room fell utterly, fatally silent. Arturian's entire environment is artificial. The stasis protects him from the fatal effects of space, which would exacerbate the Rhiannon's kiss, which would prove instantly fatal. It is simply the way of things. That environment is linked to a small meditation space in Kaede's personal quarters. That is on her personal craft. That is where Eleanor is right now, in a massive interrogation room. She looks around. There are skulls on chains everywhere. Skulls of Eldari, Tau, orcs, and mostly people. Hundreds of skulls. These are the skulls of heretics or simply people who disrespected her. The woman snarls angrily and looks up to Kaede, shaking her head. "He gave warmth, you bitch. That is why I took him. His touch was so attentive. Everything I taught him was perfectly reflected. He was a good little lover. Isaac, he let me. I told him he could screw whatever whore he wanted. But the boy, our son, was mine. The Rhiannon's kiss was going to take whatever future he had anyways. So what of it?" The silence in the chamber stretched long after Eleanor's vile confession. The air itself seemed to recoil from her words, pressing inward like a coffin closing. Kaede did not flinch. She simply let the woman's words hang there, fetid, damning, final. Then, with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who has delivered thousands of judgments, she snapped her fan shut with a sharp crack. The sound echoed like a guillotine's fall. She stepped forward, her uchikake whispered across the floor like a silk shroud dragged through blood. Skulls clinked faintly on their chains, Eldari, orc, Tau, human, each one earned, each one placed, each one a lesson. Kaede's voice was calm, measured, almost pitying. "Your honesty is appreciated." She circled the bound woman slowly, fan held in one hand like a ritual blade. "Every word has been recorded. Every twisted boast will be archived in the purity logs for ecclesiastical and inquisitorial review." She stopped just behind Eleanor's chair, her shadow cast long over her trembling form. "But you will not die." Her voice was quiet, but in it was a promise etched in steel. "That would be mercy. You will not receive mercy." Kaede slowly leaned down, her breath cold against Eleanor's ear. "You will be delivered to the Order of the Eclipsing Dawn, to Canoness Elion Veritas. She owes me several favours. You will fulfill the last." A pause, a breath, and then she whispered, "You will become an anchorite." The word hit like a thunderclap in silence. Eleanor didn't understand at first, but Kaede continued, each word heavier than the last. "Your body will be sealed inside a stasis reliquary, welded shut, sanctified, immovable. You will be kept alive, suspended between death and life, frozen in unending torment. You will not move, you will not speak, you will not die." She stood slowly, turning to face Eleanor at last. Her expression was unreadable, her tone surgical. "You will feel your body decay, piece by piece. Your nerves will scream forever, and your only companions will be the echo of the litany of penance, playing in endless loop through internal vox chants." Kaede stepped forward now, fanning herself slowly with icy elegance. "Pilgrims will walk past your casket and shed tears. Not for your salvation, but for the magnitude of your damnation. You will be a holy relic, not revered, feared, a symbol of what happens when the sacred is defiled." She paused before the bound woman, her gaze like winter over ash. "And your suffering will never end." Then, with one smooth gesture, she folded her fan. "That is what of it." And as Kaede turned, her uchikake sweeping behind her like a tide, the skulls continued their gentle clinking, welcoming one more soul to their choir of silence. The woman that is Eleanor grew up hard. She also knows how to provoke people, men mainly, but in the end she is a very unrepentant woman. She simply does not comprehend kindness. "I birthed him. I spent 9 months with him as a damned parasite inside of me. I almost died giving birth to him. He was mine. I don't know what he did to get your attention, and I don't care, but I know what he has inside of him. A warmth. He affects people, always did. I hoped he would die when he ran away. It is funny, I kept him locked away, so he wouldn't escape. I educated him, taught the little bastard to read, most can't. He repaid me by abandoning me. You think you're all that, Inquisitor?" "I know better. You were fucking him, and the best thing is, I taught him all that he knows." Kaede stood, unmoving, as Eleanor raged beneath flickering lumen strips and the looming weight of chained skulls. Blood continued to drip from the cruel spikes embedded in the interrogation chair, but the woman felt none of it, not now. Her voice rose and cracked like glass in fire, her hatred clinging to every word. "I birthed him. He was a parasite inside me. He was mine." Each sentence more venomous than the last. "I hoped he would die when he ran away." Kaede didn't move. "I educated him, taught the little bastard to read. He abandoned me." Still, the Inquisitor said nothing. Eleanor leaned forward despite the pain, her eyes wild. "You think you're all that, Inquisitor? I know better. You fucked him, and the best part?" She grinned through bloody teeth. "I taught him everything he knows." The words echoed in the chamber like rot clinging to the ribs of a grave. But Kaede, she didn't even blink. She saw it now, so clearly. Eleanor's venom wasn't just pride, it was a tactic. A last desperate play from a monster who knew there was only one mercy left, death. Kaede smirked, cold, beautiful, infinite. And then she turned, wordless, unmoved. Eleanor's screams followed her as she walked, unhurried, back through the skull-lined corridor. Kaede didn't grant her the satisfaction of fury. She granted her silence. And in that silence, Eleanor Thraune began to understand. The Inquisitor would not let her escape through death. No, she would live, and she would remember. Kaede's boots moved in silence over the polished obsidian flooring of her personal quarters, the hem of her uchikake sweeping like a funeral shroud behind her. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, muffling the world outside, the screams, the blood, the echoes of justice long overdue. Inside, the air was dim, gently perfumed with incense, jasmine and sandalwood, like him. At the centre of the chamber stood the stasis pod, its cradle humming softly with restrained energy. Within, Arturian lay encased in serene stillness, his features peaceful, untouched by the war outside. Kaede approached slowly. She did not touch the casing. Instead, she drew her fan and snapped it open with a soft crack, fanning herself gently, ritually, an action as much for control as tradition. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, gentle, as if to not disturb the dream he was locked within. "If you don't wake up, I don't blame you." She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes glassy but dry. "Lights like yours burn too fast in this wretched galaxy." A pause, she lowered the fan slightly. "There was a story I was told as a child, a tale from the Edo period, long before the Imperium, before even the Golden Age. My namesake, Hisako, was a courtesan of the highest caste. She loved a boy named Daniel." She sat on the edge of the dais near the pod, staring into the glass as if it were a reflection pool. He was mute, a foreigner. They said it was forbidden, but love does not bow to blood or rule. He died, some say by plague, others poison, and she waited. She folded her fan, resting it in her lap. 2 years. She wore her best outfits in his honour. She travelled all of my ancestral homeland to see the sights she never could when she was a courtesan. Unable to live with her sadness, she committed jigai, stabbing herself in the heart. Her eyes flicked to Arturian's still face, voice thick but unwavering. On that day, she found her Akachan, Daniel again. Kaede leaned in close, her breath fogging the glass for just a second. "I will wait 2 years. That is my vow." Her hand brushed the casing lightly. "If you still sleep, we will be placed together, entombed in a crypt beneath the cherry blossom spires of Tsukikage." A final whisper. "But you have all the time in the world, little moth." And with that, she stood, composed, and walked to the side altar, lighting a single stick of incense. The smoke curled upward, gentle, slow, and bittersweet. The stories are embellished, of course. However, there is some truth here. Daniel had been starved, not poisoned. He had been rescued by Hisako, and unfortunately the damage was done. She strangled the boy's father with her own obi and was forced to watch the boy die over a period of 6 months due to organ failure. But Kaede wouldn't know this, and her ancestors, in shame in how the original Hisako had been treated by her father, saved face with this slightly more glamorous tale. The 2-year promise after Daniel died? That part is very true. The boy shows a slight bit of response, and then of course, nothing. There is a knock on the door and Miyumi steps inside. She asks softly, "We're near Sephra Morda Onisan. You wanted me to tell you. How do you desire this handled?" Kaede did not turn immediately when the knock came. Her eyes were still fixed on the stasis cradle, on the boy who had stirred for only a heartbeat, a single tremor of almost life before slipping back into stillness. His fingers had twitched. She had felt it. And yet, the silence remained. The incense curled slowly toward the ceiling as Miyumi stepped inside, the young woman bowing lightly before she spoke, her voice delicate. "We're near Sephra Morda, Onisan. You wanted me to tell you. How do you desire this handled?" Kaede's fan whispered open once again, more from habit than ceremony, and she fanned herself lightly, though her gaze remained locked on Arturian's form. Then, softly, too softly, she spoke. "I want Calrus found." Each word was precise. "I don't care if he's among his family. I don't care if he's praying in the old fields or planting roots like some farmer priest. I want him found." She turned at last, her face composed, but her eyes were voids of glacial hatred. Whether he stands alone or surrounded by kin, whether he fled or returned home with pride, it changes nothing. She walked toward Miyumi slowly, the uchikake dragging like a bleeding vow across the floor. "His family will suffer for his sins, their bones will bleach under his name, but I want him brought to me." Kaede stopped just before the girl, her voice barely a whisper. Alive, broken if need be, but breathing. She looked once more to the stasis cradle. "One of them took from me the only light I've ever known." Then back to Miyumi. "Now I will take everything." Her fan snapped shut with a sound like judgment. "Go!" Calrus, actually, while intelligent, had been something of a black sheep. His murderous and warrior ways were not much different than how Hisako's father had been. Maybe that is why the woman let him into her bed, but it matters for naught now. He isn't easy to find. Sephra Morda is a very, very large planet. It is about twice the size of Holy Terra and much less populated. The agri-world is too valuable to destroy, and while Kaede has razed cities to the ground, even she would refuse exterminatus unless there was no other choice. She is an unhinged woman, yes, but unless for a good reason, she would die before obliterating a planet. However, the man known as Calrus Ardonius to the Ardonius farming family is eventually found. It takes nearly a month, but he is definitely found. He fights ferociously, and Juno is killed in trying to take him in. However, the Chrono Gladiator, along with Reyes, take her former interrogator down and hard. The man's legs are shattered and his arm tendons cut so he cannot fight further. He looks to Kaede and says softly, "You have to understand, it was for you. He made you into something unrecognizable." The fields of Sephra Morda glowed gold under the waning sun, serene, beautiful, and utterly deceived. There was no peace here now, only reckoning. Kaede stood over the broken form of Calrus Ardonius, the man who once shared her bed, who once whispered false loyalty in the sanctum of her presence. Now his legs were shattered, arms limp from sliced tendons, blood darkening the dirt beneath him. Yet he still clung to delusion. "You have to understand," he croaked. "It was for you. He made you into something unrecognizable." Kaede's laughter drifted on the wind, sharp, bitter, too soft to be joy and too composed to be madness. She folded her hands beneath her sleeves, her silhouette tall and regal amidst the dying light. She began to walk, slow, deliberate strides across the field, each step a sermon. "The only thing he made me," she said, voice cool and clear, "was whole again." As she moved, her eyes flicked toward the distance, where inquisitorial forces were herding 24 Ardonia's kin into a large dried-out barn. Men, women, children. None were spared. Loyalty was blood-deep, and their blood had been tainted by Calrus's treachery. She gave the barest nod. Torches were lit. The flames caught quickly, devouring the dry timbers, licking at the roof, surging into an inferno. Screams burst from inside, panicked, pleading, burning. Kaede watched it unfold with a solemn, smirking detachment. "This is how my people on Tsukikage ended the lineages of traitors," she said. "The fire takes what the sword cannot." The flames roared, the roof collapsed. Calrus screamed, not in pain, but in anguish. "You're a demon!" Kaede sighed and rolled her eyes with exaggerated patience, as though scolding a child for a tantrum. "Please, Calrus, that's old news." She gestured lightly with her hand. "Reyes, bring him, slowly." Reyes cracked his knuckles. The Chrono Gladiator grinned wordlessly, his engine ticking like a dying clock. Kaede's voice echoed over the fire. "Your pain is only beginning." And with that, she turned away, her fan snapping open in her hand once more, cooling her face as the heat of vengeance raged behind her. Reyes casually quips, "You know, I've done a lot of shit, but betraying the one who gave me a chance for a leg up? Yeah, you're a fucking moron!" Before Calrus can quip, he punches the man out cold. "That's for Juno!" Juno's body, of course, is gathered by a couple of Kaede's assistants. Kaede might be a demon in Calrus's mind, but she is one who is loyal to the end for her retinue. The woman will be returned to Katakan as properly decided. Calrus is handled not so gently by the Chrono Gladiator, who actually chuckles before the man is taken to the ship. Balthazar sighs and mumbles, "Well, this is going to really suck." The Hall of Judgment was silent. Not the sterile silence of a torture chamber, nor the thunderous silence of a battlefield. This was ritual silence, the kind carried by temples, by shrines to old gods and dead vows. The air was thick with Tsukikage incense, fragrant and cloying. Jasmine, myrrh, crushed petals of a blossom extinct to all but Kaede's home. Bells hung from the ceiling, thin, delicate, motionless. Calrus knelt in the centre of the room, bound, battered, and now stripped of armour and dignity. His clothing was ceremonial, given to him not for comfort, but for contrast, white silks over a ruined soul. Each breath he drew was a struggle. His face, bruised and bloodied, was lifted defiantly. But there was fear in his eyes. Kaede entered the room alone. She wore black, funereal black, not her usual silks of red and gold. Her uchikaki this time bore no colour, a widow's robe, a death shroud. In her hands she carried a scroll of judgment, and at her side the fan, closed, but not at rest. She began to circle him. The incense curled with her movement like ghosts dragging at her hems. "You were given trust," she began, voice quiet, devastating. "You were given purpose. You were given me." A soft chime sounded. The bells didn't move. "And you gave it away. For envy. For pride. For nothing." She unrolled the scroll with a flick of her wrist. It touched the floor. "Calrus Ardonius, once of Sephra Morda of the Ardonia's line, you stand accused of betrayal, sabotage, and personal heresy against the soul of your mistress." She stopped in front of him. "Do you deny it?" Calrus coughed blood but said nothing. Kaede raised the fan, and then crack. She struck him across the back, clean and precise, a shallow cut, not to injure, to mark. You betrayed my house, another strike. You betrayed your oaths, another. You betrayed her. The final one landed across his shoulder, the cut crossing the others. A kanji burned into flesh. Betrayer. She stepped back, breathing deeply, still composed, still regal, still filled with nothing but silence. You are not worthy of death yet. She turned away, her voice echoing like the toll of the executioner's bell. That will come when I say your pain is finished, and not before. She gave a single command. Seal him, below decks, in darkness. Let him remember the sound of bells. And as Rays and the Chrono Gladiator dragged the limp, bleeding man from the chamber, the bells above rang gently of their own accord. Kaede said nothing more, but her fan stayed open. Rays meets her in the upper decks of the ship. He isn't an idiot. He knows the score. Softly, he speaks gently. I've prepared Juno for being returned to Katachan. That bastard killed her, like she was a dog Inquisitor. She'll be given full rights thanks to you. I don't blame you for what you're doing. Tell me this, and if you want me to back off, I will. That kid, is he worth all of this? Help me understand. Fuck. Maybe I'll find someone who moves me like that, he confesses. Kaede stood near the viewport, the stars drifting like candle ash across the void. Her uchikake lay still around her fan idle in one hand. The fires of Sephra Morda's far-off continent were still visible in her memory, though the battlefield had long since gone cold. She didn't turn when Rays spoke. His voice was low, respectful, but laced with raw grief. I've prepared Juno for being returned to Katachan. That bastard killed her like she was a dog, Inquisitor. She'll be given full rights thanks to you. I don't blame you for what you're doing. Tell me this, and if you want me to back off, I will. That kid, is he worth all of this? Help me understand. Fuck. Maybe I'll find someone who moves me like that. The silence lingered before Kaede finally answered, soft, distant, as if pulling the words from the pit of her soul. Juno will be buried with full honours, as a warrior of Katachan deserves. She served me with steel and died for what was right. She paused, folding her fan with deliberate slowness. As for the boy, her voice trembled, not with weakness, but weight. He saw me. She turned then, her gaze distant but sharp, eyes like midnight glass. Not the Inquisitor. Not the executioner. Me. Her fingers curled slightly around the fan. In a world where we wear masks to survive, where trust is a myth and loyalty is purchased with blood, he looked past all of it. She stepped forward, her words now low, intimate. He made me remember who I was, before the fire, before the blood, before duty stripped the soul bare. She stopped beside Rays, meeting his eyes. That is a rarity in our world, Rays, a light like his. It doesn't belong in this damned galaxy. Her voice turned cold, like winter wind over a shrine gate. So I will not allow those who hurt souls like his to live. She looked away then, returning her gaze to the stars. That is the truth, and in that moment there was no grandeur, no cruelty, no command. Only Kaede, and the final embers of what she still believed in. The man nods gently and says, maybe I'll find a fellow like that who knows. I'll leave you to your thing, he tells her gently. The man that is Rays is crass. It is all he knows. But unlike Kalrus, who can be eloquent, he isn't a human tarantula deep down. It is how things are. Weeks pass, and Kalrus spasms in agony. He had seriously thought he could get away with what he had done. His home planet is huge, a massive place and too valuable as a prime agri-world to be torched in any way. The fool actually thought he could return to an existence he had lived before he took up the life of a criminal, and then the life of an interrogator. The man's scars and badly healed cuts and slashes are legion now. He sees the lights turn on, the sounds of bells even now causing him to weep. He asks softly, are you here to ask me to apologise for what I did? I see you, the real you. I see the woman who slew her enemies in the battlefield and also in her bed. I see true beauty right now. Or I did until you burned my fracking family in front of my damned eyes, you Tsukikage bitch! Tears stream from his eyes as he says those words. The lights flared in the bell vault, casting harsh illumination over Kalrus's broken form. His body hung in ritual suspension, arms bound, legs twisted awkwardly in the cradle of suffering Kaede had crafted with careful hate. Scars webbed his chest, and the wounds from her ceremony still glistened faintly, re-inked as a warning. The bells tolled once, twice. A melody of memory and regret. Kaede stepped into the chamber like a shadow from a shrine. Her uchikake flowed behind her, dark as morning, the sigils of Tsukikage woven into the hem in silent, endless script. Kalrus raised his head, face streaked with tears and blood. "Are you here to ask me to apologize?" he rasped. "I see you, the real you. The battlefield spectre, the killer in silk, true beauty, until you burned my fracking family in front of my eyes, you Tsukikage bitch!" His scream cracked into sobs. Kaede did not flinch. She stood still, fan closed, her voice a soft and silken blade. "In 1 year and 8 months, if he does not awaken," her words came like scripture. Measured, final. "I will end his life and then I will end my own." She stepped forward into the light, her shadow falling across his face. "We will be buried together, in a crypt beneath the Cherry Gate shrine of my ancestral house. My name will be remembered not for fire, but for faith." Kalrus trembled, but she wasn't finished. "And you," her voice cooled, like winter through a paper screen, "will not join us in death. No, if he does not return." She tilted her head, fan snapping open once more. "You will be strapped into an anchorite, alongside Eleanor." She smiled, the kind of smile only vengeance could carve. "She's serving the Imperium beautifully, in perfect silence. You'll match." She leaned in, voice so soft it curled into his soul. You always wanted to be close to me. Now you'll be next to the only other creature I despise more than you." Then she stepped back and let the bells toll again. Kalrus had, true to Kaede's word, been spared of the scouring of the hive-city Tharsis Echelon in the wrathful fire that killed nearly 1 billion lives, millions regardless. His family was also. In gratitude, he offered to personally overlook the boy's care, and he is good at this. He tells her softly when he looks over the boy's condition. Sure enough, his heartbeat and the like are strong. The stabilization field keeping the Rhiannon's kiss from killing him in the void of space which the ship floats in. He tells her gently, "I've got some semi-good news for you. His brain is showing some signs of activity. And also, I talked with Balthazar, and it is interesting. If he wakes up, he might be perfectly fine, or literally an imbecile, and I don't mean disrespect. However, if the boy does wake, the Rhiannon's kiss, unfortunately while suspended, once he is removed from this field, it will reactivate in record speed, even in an atmosphered environment. Possibly a week of life, if that. I think you already know this. I know the ways of your people to a degree. Maybe the boy would want you to live?" Kaede stood near the stasis cradle, the chamber dim but suffused with the soft pulse of life-preserving energy. The incense had long since faded, but its memory lingered, just as he lingered, caught between stillness and fate. Dr. Eliron Kalrus stood nearby, datapad in hand, the glow casting lines of age across his face. He spoke gently, as he always did with her. No trembling, no reverence. Just truth. "I've got some semi-good news for you. His brain's showing signs of activity. And Balthazar? Well, he thinks it's a coin toss. Could wake up completely whole, or an imbecile, and I mean that with all due respect." He paused, adjusting the readout. "The Rhiannon's kiss is still dormant in the field, but if he's removed from it, it'll kill him fast. A week, maybe less. Even atmosphere won't help. You know this, I'm sure." Kaede didn't look at him immediately. She stared at Arturian, at the soft rise and fall of his chest, at the gentle flicker behind his eyelids, at the boy who once handed her a drawing and called her perfect. Then she spoke, soft, not broken, but frayed. "I know." She stepped closer, laying her hand against the stasis field, feeling the faint buzz beneath her palm. "My people remember our dead with silence, and when that silence is long enough, we join them, like my ancestor, Hisako." She turned, finally, her eyes meeting Kallus's, and for the first time there was no fire, no chill, no grandeur, only truth. "I will live," as she did 2 years, a breath, a closing of her fan. "Then I will return to Tsukikage." She smiled, but it was the smile of someone done pretending. "I am tired, Kalrus." Her voice was neither bitter nor mournful. "Centuries of fire, of judgment, arrogance mistaken for faith. I've worn too many faces, forgotten too many names. I thought power would bring clarity, but all it did was empty me further." She looked back at the cradle. And then he looked at me, and for the first time, I remembered who I was. Another pause. "But memory cannot stop time, and time is almost finished." She stepped back. "I will live 2 years, that is all I have left to offer. And in that moment, Kaede was not Inquisitor, nor executioner, nor heir of a dying dynasty. She was simply a woman, waiting for the last light to rise. Time does pass, and it is over a year. He silently awakens, staring blankly at a wall for a moment, before entirely regaining consciousness. He began showing true brain activity a few months ago. He is no longer on the ship, for if he awakens fully, the Rhiannon's kiss would kill him outright if he were in orbit. He realizes he isn't on his home planet, no. He is somewhere else. Cold peaked mountains can be seen over deep fields and small ornate homes. Shrines are not everywhere, but the Oriental influence cannot be denied. He finds he is somewhere he does not recognize. Kaede sits, her fan in her lap folded. She had been prepared to end his life swiftly and mercifully if he showed signs of any mental slowness. The Medicae had been straightforward. Signs would show one or the other way fast. Arturian speaks softly. Kaede. His voice, soft and deep as always, trembles. He is no longer hooked to machines or tubes. He sits comfortably in a large chair overlooking a balcony. He is sitting in Kaede's personal front porch in the Sayuri estate. Kaede did not answer immediately. The mountain winds whispered through the carved wooden railings of the Sayuri estate's veranda, carrying with them the scent of pine, incense and snow. The low chimes on the eaves sang in soft, solemn intervals. The peaks beyond glowed in faint twilight, their tips kissed by the last light of the day. Arturian's voice had broken the stillness. Not loudly, not urgently, just softly.
Kaede?
The fan in her lap, her ever-present mask, was folded quietly and slid into the sleeve of her black outer robe. Her hands trembled. Still she said nothing. Instead she stood, walked the 2 steps between them and, without grace, without ceremony, yanked him into her lap. Her strength was still immense, and his body, still fragile from the long road back, offered no resistance. She buried her face into the crook of his neck, her long hair cascading over his shoulders like silken shadow, and then she clutched him. Tightly, painfully. Her fingers dug into his back, her breathing sharp, almost panicked, as if to confirm. She didn't cry, not audibly, but her whole form shook. She didn't say his name or whisper any poetic reunion. She just held him, like a drowning woman clinging to the shore she thought she'd never reach. And for a moment, in that high, sacred stillness, Inquisitor Kaede Shirohana ceased to exist. Only Hisako Sayuri remained, and she had her moth back. She felt it, subtle at first, like the trembling of a leaf in early frost. His body, still weak, still recovering, was shivering. Arturian hadn't said anything, of course. He never did when he was hurting. Not unless she forced it from him. Even now, even after everything, he simply sat in her lap, quietly enduring the cold, the wind, and the weight of everything he'd returned to. Kaede's breath hitched, then left her in a soft, hollow laugh. One hand rose from his back, brushing the sweat-dampened hair from his brow. "You're still such a fool," she whispered gently, trying to be strong. And then, with the same reverence one might use to draw a sacred blade, she reached to her side and pulled her uchikake free from where it had been draped. With one smooth motion, she wrapped it around them both. Crimson and black, heavy with silk and memories, it enveloped him completely, just like it used to. She adjusted it carefully, shielding him from the cold mountain air, tucking it around his shoulders as if swaddling something precious. Her chin rested against the crown of his head. "There," she murmured. "Now you're warm." The wind whispered through the pines again, and beneath the weight of centuries, vengeance and near loss, Kaede allowed herself, for just that moment, to breathe. They are able to catch up. It is a tragic thing, really. The Rhiannon's kiss is a vicious thing, really. The suspension had prolonged the boy's life to a point, but the disease, unfortunately, is eternally fatal. They are intimate for the second time in the boy's life, and it is not as frenzied as it had been before. In fact, it isn't sexual. The disease has rendered him so frail that such would kill him. He walks with her, seeing a small shrine. It reads in kanji, "Hisako and Daniel. Their shame brought us our honor and redemption." Arturian, of course, doesn't understand such writing, but he understands why she brought him here. He leans against her weakly. "This Daniel, you said his name was Cervantes, right? That means he is an ancestor of mine, and Hisako, well, that speaks for itself. Like I said once before, the Emperor has a serious sense of humor." He says this with a wan smile. Kaede's smirk was slow to form, soft at the edges, touched with exhaustion and something fragile beneath it. But it was real. As Arturian leaned against her, speaking in that gentle, worn voice of his, the wind tugged at her sleeves and the silk of her uchikakeke like the hands of old ghosts. She drew her fan out, not in ritual, not in show, but as she had done 100 times before when his words earned one of her rare private smiles. With a flick, she tapped him lightly on the head. "Your humour hasn't improved," she chided with a small, affectionate chuckle, "but I'll allow it." Her gaze turned to the shrine, the kanji carved in stone, ancient and sorrowful. "Their shame brought us our honour and redemption." She stared at it for a long moment, her voice quieter now, barely above a breath. "I have always believed that the will of the kami and the light of the emperor brings all spirits full circle." She looked at him, truly looked at him, "even if it takes millennia." And then, gently, she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. The wind stilled. The chimes near the shrine rang once, and the circle, for the first time in over 2,000 years, closed. Time passes faster than either would want. Arturian sleeps soundly in the woman's arms in her bed. The Tsukikage people don't use futons or much of that. It is simply not practical. Kneeling on knees and the like is still done for discipline amongst the court of their nobility, but such is the way of it. Arturian spasms gently, nuzzling into her neck as he simply says, "Remember, you're perfect and always were." His body spasms once more, and he gives the ghost. The room was dim, lit only by the pale moonlight slipping through the carved wooden screens. The silks that adorned her bed, woven in deep reds and mournful blacks, rustled faintly in the breeze from the mountain beyond. The air held the scent of pine, of fading incense, and of the warmth they had shared one final time. Arturian lay curled in her arms, his breathing light, shallow until it wasn't. His final words, "Remember you're perfect and always were," passed from his lips like a prayer, like a benediction. Then a final spasm, gentle like a still. Kaede did not cry, she had known. Down to the hour, the rhythm of his breath, the way his skin had cooled just slightly over the past day. She had known. And she had chosen to spend this moment exactly as she was now, with him. Silently, she pulled his frail, cooling form tighter into her own. Her arms wrapped around him like silk, bare and vulnerable, her breath steady against the hollow where his neck met his shoulder. She curled around him, as though by holding his body she could preserve his soul just a few moments longer. And in a voice so low it barely touched the air, she whispered in the sacred tongue of Tsukikage, "Subete wa runtonari. Sigil has come full circle, and I will see you on the other side soon." No fan, no armor, no mask, just Kaede, alone in the bed of a mountain shrine, holding her beloved and waiting. There is a simple burning of incense and an old man that is a monk who is a witness. This is in standing of what had happened back in the Edo period over 2,000 years ago. Hisako's former owner, a man named Eiji Shiro, had overlooked this with shocking understanding. The old man silently recites the old words and the rites before bowing and leaving Kaede behind. The boy had been buried in a mausoleum not far from the Sayuri family's tomb. Unfortunately, he will not be buried there, as he was not their blood. But in the end, Kaede has had an enlarged space built here, so she can be interred here once the 2 years is up. Miyumi, when Kaede stands and approaches her, asks softly, "What now, Onisan?" The incense burned low, its tendrils rising like quiet prayers into the cold mountain air. The shrine was still, the stone floors echoing only the faint murmurs of ancient rites. Spoken with reverence by the old monk who bore witness, a man whose lineage traced back to those who had once tended Hisako's own burial centuries ago. He said nothing beyond the sacred words, did not question, did not offer judgment, only bowed once, deeply, before turning and retreating from the shrine's sanctum, leaving Kaede alone with the silence that remained. The mausoleum, stone and carved darkwood, weathered and strong, stood not far from the Sayuri ancestral tomb. Though Arturian could never be interred within the blood vaults, Kaede had long prepared this space. A chamber beside his had been left open for her when the time came. She stood still as stone before it. When she finally turned, Miyumi waited in silence, her eyes low but glistening, the folds of her own mourning robe stirring faintly in the mountain wind. She stepped forward, her voice delicate, unsure, almost pleading. "What now, Oni-san?" Kaede looked at her, truly looked. The girl had grown, hardened, understood things no novitiate ever should, but she still needed her anchor. Kaede placed a gloved hand gently on Miyumi's shoulder. Her voice came low, soft, but unshakable.
Now!
It is time for Kalrus to embrace his destiny. She said nothing more. No fire, no wrath, just the echo of inevitability and the silence of closing circles. Kalrus comes to. He finds he is in a field, naked as a jaybird. He sees he is in an abandoned barn, different than the ones of his homeworld, and more of an oriental flavour, but a barn regardless. He looks about, still restrained in an agonizing way. He remembers when he had asked Kaede to show him her homeworld, and she had casually told him nope. Now he wishes he were anywhere but here. He knows he isn't being placed in a coffin with pain amplifiers, so he ain't going to be made an anchorite. The man scowls angrily and then shudders with pained exhaustion. I guess the little... What did you call him? T-Rat woke up. Where is he? Burning in the warp. Maybe a bitch of Slanesh. The faint scent of cedar and ash drifted through the dilapidated beams of the old barn. A place once meant for harvest, now repurposed for reckoning. Kalrus lay sprawled in the dirt, naked, wrists bound with iron filament etched in Tsukikage script, the symbols of penance and silence etched into his flesh from a dozen careful lashings. His muscles ached with cold and strain, and his once proud eyes were rimmed red with fatigue and disbelief. The architecture above him was unfamiliar. Arched eaves, paper slat remnants, beams carved with ancestral markings. He knew where he was now. Tsukikage. He had begged once, playfully, arrogantly, for Kaede to show it to him. She had smiled then and said, no. Now he regretted asking. I guess the little... What did you call him? T-Rat. Woke up, he spat hoarsely. Where is he? Burning in the warp? Maybe a bitch of Slanesh? The light shifted as the barn doors opened. Kaede stepped inside, the wind tugging at the ends of her black mourning robe. No armour, no silk, no pretense, just a smirk, quiet, sharp and final. She didn't answer immediately. She simply stepped closer, a lit torch in her hand, its fire crackling with old truths. That fire, that venom in your voice, that's what drew me to you once. Her voice was wistful, not warm, just remembering. I was a fool, an empty, hollow fool. I mistook power for purpose, mistook your rage for passion. She stopped before the pyre she had built herself. Careful, old wood stacked high, the structure circular, enclosed. It would burn cleanly, it would burn completely. But my light is gone now. Her eyes never left him. And I have 2 years left to purge the unclean, to close circles. You've just made my work that much easier. She tossed the torch. It landed with a muffled thump, and the fire caught immediately, hungry and eager, racing up the dry timber. Kalrus's eyes widened in horror as the flames surrounded him, and Kaede turned without another word, her fan tucked beneath her arm. She did not watch him burn. She'd already buried what mattered. Adrasha had warned her not to let this situation make Kaede like her. She actually had foreseen this, but had the woman who hates Kaede like a true enemy but understands her like a sister seen this? She actually would be relieved that the woman who is her best enemy never became as she did. Heretics burn and one planet is given exterminatus. There is no regret, yet unlike the Kaede of old, there is no more vain and flippant choices. She actually carries out her position with accuracy and effect in 2 years beyond the centuries of before. There is no reprieve, only the Emperor's judgment. The 2 years pass, which she promised Arturian she would carry on, are carried through. She tells her initiates and acolytes her plans, and they ain't thrilled, but they understand. The Chrono Gladiator is retired and given full burial rites. Reyes moves on. He simply is, as he always was, a mercenary. Balthazar is surprisingly of all things remanded into Adrasha's retinue, where he is treated decently until death. Miyumi stands beside of Kaede now. She looks to her friend and mentor. I was able to find the blade. She hands her a cherry wood tanto, surprisingly pristine. It is the one the original Hisako had used upon herself, stabbing herself in the heart 2 years after Daniel Cervantes had died. The mausoleum where Arturian is interred is right before them. The air was crisp atop the mountain, the peaks surrounding the Sayuri ancestral grounds draped in the silence of reverence. Snow dusted the ancient stones, glinting faintly in the early light of dawn. The great mausoleum stood quiet, its walls carved with the emblems of legacy, honour and sorrow. Before it, a smaller shrine rested. Arturian's resting place, simple, yet adorned with fresh offerings and folded prayer flags. Kaede stood still before it. Her robes were simple, ceremonial white, untouched by blood or war. Over them, she wore her uchikake, the same crimson and black silk that had swept the floor of hive cities and tea houses, battlefields and courts. Its embroidered sigils fluttered in the wind one last time. Beside her, Miyumi, no longer a girl, no longer a novitiate, a woman grown, tempered by grief and purpose, held the cherrywood tanto in both hands, bowing as she presented it. "I was able to find the blade," she whispered. Kaede took it gently, nodding once, slow and resolute. "You did well." She turned to her, placing a hand briefly on the girl's shoulder. "Tell my family. I request nothing, only that they keep this place clean." She offered no long farewell. There was nothing left to say. With fluid grace, Kaede walked forward to the foot of the mausoleum and knelt. She unsheathed the tanto with quiet reverence. The blade glinted softly in the light, its edges sharp as it was with 40,000 years ago, untouched by time. She exhaled, then whispered in Tsukikage, her voice barely audible against the wind. "Sugu ni hoimashou. I will see you soon, my tea-rat. Wait for me." With one final motion, precise, practiced, Kaede drove the blade beneath her ribs and into her heart. There was no pain, no gasp, only stillness. She collapsed beside the shrine, her uchikake fanned out like the wings of a dying phoenix, the wind catching the silks for one last breath. And in the silence that followed, the mountain bore witness, the circle closed.